Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, and relax. I arrived late in the afternoon with a small suitcase and backpack. The place was an old house on a quiet street far from the city center. The owner had given me a room on the top floor. He told me it would be quiet and empty. He said there were no other guests, no other tenants, and that I would have the entire floor to myself. I wanted isolation. I wanted a few days of silence. I paid in cash, got the key, and climbed the stairs. My legs felt a bit weak from the long drive and poor sleep I'd been getting lately. I hoped these days away would help me clear my head. When I entered the room, I saw a bed with clean sheets and a simple wooden chair next to a small table. There was a heavy window with old glass and a thick curtain. There was also a low cabinet with 2 drawers for my clothes. The floor was hardwood, old and uneven, with some dark stains that looked like spilled coffee or water. The walls were painted white, but the paint seemed thin, as if it had been there for decades. Under the door, I could see a bit of light coming from the corridor. The room smelled like dust and old wood. I closed the door and locked it. I tried to open the window, but it stuck. I pulled harder, and it finally slid open, letting in some cool evening air. I unpacked my clothes. I placed my toothbrush and razor in the small bathroom that was connected to the room by a narrow door. The bathroom had a toilet, a sink, and a small shower with a yellowed curtain. I noticed the pipes made a faint rattling sound when I turned the faucet. I guess the plumbing was old. I sat on the bed and the springs creaked under my weight. I stayed there for a few minutes listening. I heard nothing unusual. I decided to walk around the top floor. The corridor was long and had 4 rooms, including mine. 2 of the rooms were locked. One was empty, just a bare room with a dusty floor and a cracked mirror on the wall. The corridor ended at a thick wooden door that was also locked. The owner had said not to worry about the other rooms, that they were not in use. The hallway had dim light from a single bulb, and the wallpaper was peeling. I touched it and felt the rough plaster behind it. The air smelled stale. I returned to my room. It was getting dark outside. I closed the window and turned on the small lamp next to the bed. It cast a weak yellow light, enough to see around but not enough to feel comfortable. I sat down and tried to read a paperback book I had brought. After a while, I felt hungry. I went downstairs expecting to find someone or a kitchen. The first floor had a large foyer and a few doors. One led to a dusty sitting room with old chairs and no TV. Another was a closed study with no one inside. I found a small kitchen that looked barely used. There was a stove, a sink, and an old fridge with a few bottles of water and a carton of milk. No fresh food. I had brought some canned soup, so I opened one and heated it on the stove. I ate it straight from the pan, the metal spoon scraping the bottom making a sharp sound. I went back upstairs and got ready to sleep. I left the corridor light on and the door slightly open. I wanted to feel less alone. As I lay in bed, I heard a faint sound through the wall. It was a whisper, but I couldn't understand the words. It sounded like someone reciting names. They were names I didn't recognize. The voice was low and hoarse, pausing between names as if waiting for someone to answer. I didn't move. I stayed there, listening. My mouth felt dry. After a few minutes, the whispering stopped. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. I opened the door and looked into the corridor. It was empty. I checked the empty room. It was still empty. I returned to bed and tried to sleep. I woke up in the early morning feeling stiff. I hadn't slept well. I remembered the whispers. I thought maybe I had dreamed them. I got dressed and went downstairs. The front door was locked, so I tried to find the owner or anyone, but I saw no one. I saw a note on a side table in the foyer that said he would be away for a few days. He left a phone number in case of emergencies. I tried calling it on my cell phone, but there was no signal. My phone showed no bars. I felt a bit annoyed, but decided to spend the day out. I got in my car and drove around town, buying some groceries and water. I planned to make a quick dinner later and try to sleep earlier. When I returned, it was late afternoon. The house was silent. I carried my grocery bag upstairs. On the way, I noticed one of the locked doors was slightly ajar. I stood in front of it. Inside, I saw a dark room with a large wardrobe and a bed frame without a mattress. There was a smell of mold. I reached inside to flip a light switch. The bulb flickered but did not stay on. I heard a sound behind me and turned. I saw nothing. I stepped back into the corridor and pushed the door shut. It closed with a loud click. In my room, I unpacked the groceries and placed the bottles of water on the small table. I had some crackers and a can of tuna. I ate them cold. I tried to read again, but my mind kept returning to the sound I thought I heard behind me. I took a shower. The water was lukewarm and smelled like metal. After drying off, I felt tired, but tense. I sat on the bed with the lamp on and listened. At first, I heard only the building's old noises, wood creaking, the wind outside, and a drip from somewhere in the bathroom. As the night went on, I heard the whispering again. This time, it was clearer. It was on the other side of the wall near the headboard of my bed. I heard a voice whispering names. Some sounded French, some sounded old-fashioned. I heard rustling as if someone's clothes were brushing against the wall. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. The voice repeated the names. It sounded tired, like it had been doing this for a long time. I knocked on the wall. The whispering stopped. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out slowly, listening again. After a few moments of silence, I heard soft breathing. It wasn't my breathing. It was coming from inside the wall. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight from my bag and showed it around the room. Everything looked normal. I decided to go into the corridor. I opened my door and stepped out. The hallway was dimly lit by a single bulb. I saw no one. I checked the door that had been ajar. It was locked again. I tugged at the handle, but it didn't move. I walked to the end of the hall and pressed my ear against the thick locked door. I heard nothing. I stood there, my heart beating, unsure what to do. I tried to steady my breathing. My forehead felt damp. I wiped it with my sleeve. I went back to bed, leaving the door open a crack. I managed to sleep for a few hours. When I woke up, it was morning. I spent the day outside again, sitting in my car and reading in a nearby park. I avoided staying inside the house. When I returned later, I carried a flashlight, a small knife from my kitchen stuff, and a bottle of water. I decided to try to confront whatever it was. I wanted to see if someone was actually in the house. That night, I waited in my room with the lamp off. I sat in the chair next to the table, holding the flashlight on my lap. It was quiet for a long time. I started to think maybe I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, a soft whisper. It came from the wall. The voice repeated names, but this time it also said a few words I didn't catch. I thought I heard go or leave. I got up slowly, walked to the wall and listened. The whisper was close. The voice sounded calm, not angry. It was just there, on the other side, as if reading a list. I pressed my hand against the wall. The plaster felt cold. I knocked lightly. The whispering paused, then continued as if I had not done anything. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. My stomach felt tight. I took a few steps back and walked into the corridor. I turned on my flashlight and shone it at the floor, walls and closed doors. I saw no marks, no footprints, nothing. I checked the empty room again. Still empty. The locked doors were solid and showed no signs of being opened. I listened at each one. No sound. As I stood in the corridor, I felt a presence behind me, as if someone was standing very close. I heard a faint exhale, warm against my neck. I spun around, shining the flashlight. No one was there. I noticed my hands were shaking. I gripped the flashlight tighter. I returned to my room, closed the door and locked it. I shoved a chair against the handle. I sat on the bed and waited. The whispering started again. The voice repeated names I didn't know, sounding patient and steady. I felt sweat on my back. My breathing was shallow. I wanted to shout at it to stop, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. I could feel goosebumps on my arms and legs. My mouth felt dry. I took a sip of water and tried to calm down. The whispering stopped after a while. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint movement in the corridor. Someone dragging their feet lightly, or maybe crawling, with soft scraping sounds like nails on wood. I got up once or twice to check, but never saw anything. Only felt a slight draft, and smelled something musty. I felt trapped. The silence was heavy. My chest felt tight. I tried to think of simple things, such as what I would do when I left this place, but couldn't concentrate. My thoughts were all jumbled and tense. By morning, I knew I could not spend another night here. I walked around the house looking for the owner, but he was not there. I tried the front door again, and it was unlocked this time. I stepped outside into the daylight and breathed the fresh air. I felt relieved. I drove to a nearby diner, ate a quick meal, and sat there for a while thinking about what to do. Part of me wanted to gather my things and leave immediately. Another part of me wanted to stay just one more night to see if I could figure this out. I forced myself to go back. I climbed the stairs, opened my room, and saw everything was as I left it. I checked the walls. They were solid. I tapped them and listened. No sound. I opened my suitcase and started to pack. I hesitated, then stopped. I decided to give it one last try. I would stay for a few more hours into the evening. If I heard the voice again, I would ask it something. I didn't know what, but I would try. That evening, I turned off the lights and stood in the center of the room. I waited. After a while, I heard the whispering. It was soft at first. I waited until it got a bit louder. Then I spoke in a low voice. I said, "Who are you?" I spoke clearly but quietly. The whispering stopped. I waited. I repeated my question. I heard a faint inhale as if the voice was surprised. Then I heard the floor creak outside in the corridor. I unlocked the door, yanked it open, and shone my flashlight. I saw nothing. The corridor was empty, but I heard something move near the locked room. I stepped closer and tried the handle. It turned this time. Inside, the wardrobe door was open. I walked in and shone my light inside the wardrobe. It was empty, just old wood. When I backed away, I heard a whisper right at my ear. It said something like, "Enough." I felt a burst of cold air on my neck and stumbled back. I hit my shoulder on the doorframe. My heart was pounding. I rushed out and slammed the door shut. Back in my room, I realized I was done. My limbs felt weak and shaky. I packed my things quickly. I heard soft steps in the corridor. It sounded like someone pacing back and forth. I waited until the steps moved away from my door, then slowly opened it. The corridor light was dim. I could feel the presence there. It made the air feel heavy. I walked quietly, holding my bag close, and went down the stairs. Every step on the old wood made a creak. I flinched at each sound. At the bottom of the stairs, I listened. I heard a whisper upstairs, faint but clear, repeating names. It sounded final. I gripped the doorknob, opened the front door, and stepped outside. I could still feel the tension in my shoulders and neck. I got into my car and drove away, leaving that house behind. I did not care about the few days I had paid for. I wanted distance.
I wanted fresh air.
I wanted to stop feeling that tightness in my chest. I never learned who was whispering behind the walls or what they wanted. I do not want to know. The memory of that voice and those sounds in the corridor are enough. The way it whispered those names, the way it seemed to crawl and hover in the darkness, the way it made every part of me feel tense and uncertain. That was enough. I never went back. I never called the number the owner left. I do not know what became of that place, and I do not care. I only know that I left before something made me lose my mind. That was enough for me. I noticed it the second night after I moved into my new place. I had barely unpacked my clothes when it happened. I was standing in front of my living room window, looking across at the building opposite mine. It was late, past midnight. Most windows were dark except for one on the 5th floor. I saw my face on its glass surface. At first, I thought it was just my reflection bouncing off some strange angle. But it looked off. The eyes in that reflection seemed darker, the cheeks thinner. I blinked and the reflection didn't blink with me. Instead, it stared straight back at me, like it was waiting for something. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. The place is new, with smooth white walls and a sharp smell of fresh paint and clean surfaces. The building is quiet. The hallways have soft lighting that never flickers. The elevators hum, and the lobby is empty most of the time. My windows are large, meant to let in a lot of light during the day. At night, they turn into big black panels that reflect everything inside. I usually don't mind that, but after I saw that face, I started feeling uneasy. That first time, I stepped closer to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The glass in the building across was also large and modern, looking like any other apartment window. But inside that dark rectangle, I saw a shape that resembled me. Same height, similar haircut, same shoulders. I waved my hand slowly. My reflection didn't wave back. It just stood there facing me. Its chin slightly lowered, its eyes were sunken. I couldn't make out details like skin color or hair texture well. It was too dark, but I sensed that the thing was looking right at me. My throat felt dry. I didn't hear anything unusual at first, just the hum of my refrigerator behind me and the muffled sounds of distant traffic. But my palms started sweating. I backed away and sat down on the couch. I turned on the TV, trying to break that moment. I didn't look outside again that night. I told myself I was just seeing a weird reflection, maybe caused by some odd lighting in my apartment. I tried to relax. I watched a stupid show until I felt tired, and then went to bed. I slept fitfully, waking up every couple of hours. I don't know why, but I felt like someone was watching me through the walls. The next evening, I couldn't resist checking again. Part of me wanted to pretend nothing had happened, but I walked right to the window as soon as it got dark outside. The same window across the gap was lit up. The reflection was there again. This time I reached out and touched my glass. The reflection looked like it was touching the glass on its side too, but its hand didn't align with mine. It was as if it was reaching at a different angle. I saw a slight tilt in its head. Then I noticed its eyes more clearly. They looked sunken, like two deep holes. There was no bright reflection in them, no shine, just dark hollow spots. I heard my own breathing. I smelled a strange scent in my apartment. It was faint at first, but it reminded me of something sour, like old sweat or spoiled milk. I checked my fridge, but everything seemed fine. The smell was stronger near the window. I opened it a crack to get some fresh air. As soon as I did, a soft breeze came in, and I felt a strange pressure in my ears like going up in an elevator too fast. I shut it again. The reflection didn't move. I felt a shiver down my neck. I tried waving my arms wildly and jumped up and down. The reflection didn't copy me, it just stared. My stomach tightened. I rubbed my face and tried not to panic. I told myself it was a trick of light, maybe something on that apartment's window, some weird decoration, but it looked too much like a person. It even had my general shape. That was what made it so disturbing. It was like looking at a version of myself that wasn't connected to me at all. Over the next few nights, I experimented. I turned off every light in my apartment and stood by the window. The reflection still appeared even though now my apartment was dark, and it should have been impossible to see my face reflected in that distance. The figure was always there, staring, not imitating me. When I leaned in close, I saw it breathing. Its shoulders moved slightly up and down. Mine were still. I tried opening and closing my mouth. It didn't follow my movements. Instead, sometimes it tilted its head slowly, like it was curious about me. I started feeling a heavy tension in my chest every time I approached the window. The sour smell got stronger at night. It lingered around my living room. I wiped down the walls, checked the ventilation, and sniffed every corner. The smell didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. It just hovered in the air. I also noticed that whenever I stood by the window, my ears felt blocked, like I was under some kind of pressure. My head felt heavy and my eyes watered slightly. I tried ignoring the window. I pulled down the blinds and turned my back to it, but that didn't help. I felt it behind me. I felt something in the air. My muscles stayed tense. I couldn't relax. I spent hours on my couch with the TV muted, listening for any sound. Sometimes I heard a soft creaking noise like someone stepping on a loose floorboard, but my floor is solid, and I live alone. I walked around the apartment, stepping hard, trying to recreate the sound. I couldn't. I tried talking to someone about it. I ended up chatting with a security guard in the lobby one afternoon. I asked if there was anyone living in that specific apartment across from mine, or if there had been any complaints about strange reflections at night. The guard looked at me confused and said the building across was mostly offices and storage rooms on the facing side, not apartments. He said no one should be there at that hour. I thanked him and went back upstairs, but that night I felt restless. I paced around. I ate dinner, standing up, hardly tasting my food. I took a shower and stood under the hot water longer than usual, trying to calm down. When I finally looked out the window again, the reflection was there, unchanged. I turned off all my lights, hoping that might break the illusion. In the darkness, I could still see the shape in the opposite window. Its face was clearer, though still dark around the eyes. I reached forward, pressing my palms against the glass. My heart was pounding. I leaned in until my nose almost touched the pane. The reflection leaned too, but not in sync. It moved a moment after me, as if considering what I did before deciding to move. Its hands were at different angles, not mirroring mine. Its head was lower. I watched its lips. They were slightly parted, and I thought I saw them tremble. I backed off, breathing hard. My legs felt weak. I sat on the floor resting against my couch. The smell was strong that night. I could taste it in the back of my throat. It made me gag. I got up and opened all my windows in the living room. I needed fresh air. The breeze came in. I felt a sudden chill, even though it wasn't cold outside. I looked over at the window again. The reflection was there. I said something, just a single word maybe. Hello. Of course, it didn't respond. I don't know why I spoke. It felt wrong. I couldn't ignore the situation anymore. I decided to do something. I didn't know what, but I couldn't just sit there. The next day, I stayed out of my apartment as long as possible. I worked late, had dinner out, and came home close to midnight. When I stepped into my living room, the lights of the opposite building were off. I exhaled and felt a small relief. Maybe I wouldn't see it tonight. I stood in the dark and watched. After a few minutes, a faint light flickered on in that window. There it was again. This time, the figure pressed closer. I could see the outline more clearly. It had my frame, but the shoulders seemed a bit narrower, and the neck a bit longer. I noticed its jawline sharp and tense. The eyes were dark holes. They didn't glow, they just sucked in light. I felt something brush against my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see a loose curtain or something, but nothing was there. The air felt thick. My eyes stung. I stepped away from the window and walked slowly to my kitchen. I opened a bottle of water and drank. My hand was shaking. I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe someone in that building was playing a prank, projecting an image. Maybe the glass had some weird coating. But why would the reflection move like that? I turned on every light in my apartment. I put music on my phone, something calm and steady. I tried to pretend everything was normal. After about 20 minutes, I turned the music off and stepped back to the window. The figure was gone. Only darkness remained. I sighed and felt a sudden wave of relief. I turned to leave, but I heard a faint tapping sound from outside. I moved closer to the window and listened. A soft tap, like a fingertip on glass. I checked my own window, thinking maybe something outside was hitting it. Maybe a bird or a branch. But I was high up. There was no balcony, no tree branch. I tapped my own glass with my fingernail. I produced a similar sound. Then I listened. I heard the tapping again, but this time it seemed to come from the opposite building. I squinted. I saw a faint outline. The figure was back, dimmer this time, as if standing a few feet away from the window. I noticed its hand now. It was pressed against the glass. Fingers splayed. They were long and thin. I decided I couldn't deal with this alone anymore. I grabbed my phone and tried to call the building's front desk. No one picked up. It was late. I tried calling a friend, but it just rang. I didn't know what I would say anyway. Saying I saw a strange reflection that looked like me, but wasn't me, sounded crazy. I stood there holding the phone, looking out the window. The figure's hand slowly dragged down the glass on its side. I couldn't hear the sound, but I imagined it. The sour smell in my apartment got stronger. I coughed and opened a window again, trying to let it out. As I breathed the night air, I felt a slight dizziness. My vision blurred for a moment. When I focused again, I saw the figure in that window had moved closer. It filled almost the entire frame now. I could see its face in detail. It looked like me, but thinner, paler. The skin around my eyes was dark, as if bruised. My lips were tight. My nose was slightly bent. It wasn't a perfect copy of me, but it was close enough that I felt nauseated. I tried to think of something to do. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and aimed it at the other building's window. I shone a bright beam of light directly across. I saw the light reflect on the glass. The figure didn't flinch or move away. It just stood there. I could see its outline more clearly now. It wore something dark, no pattern visible, just a dark shirt or jacket. Its hair looked like mine, short and neat. I turned the flashlight off and dropped it on the floor. I backed away again, stumbling into my coffee table. I heard a soft grunting sound escape my throat. My eyes watered. I wiped my face and stood there breathing hard. The tapping started again. I could feel it in my temples. I imagined it tapping on my side of the glass. I rushed to the window and pulled the blinds down. I stood there, holding the cord, my knuckles white. With the blinds down, I couldn't see it anymore, but I knew it was there. I listened for any sound. The apartment was quiet except for my own breathing. The smell was still there. I decided to sleep in my bedroom with the door closed. I turned on the bathroom light and left it on all night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. I heard occasional creaks from the living room, but I refused to go check. In the morning, I felt tired and shaky. I ate a quick breakfast and went to work early, leaving the apartment behind. During the day, I felt normal. The smell was gone from my mind. I even started doubting what I had seen. But when I returned that evening, stepping into my quiet apartment, I smelled that sour scent right away. I knew what was waiting at the window even before I looked. I forced myself to approach the blinds. I lifted them just enough to peek outside. The figure was there, pressed so close that I swore I could see the pores on its skin. Its eyes were locked on me. I heard my heart beating in my ears. I felt the heavy pressure in the air. My throat tightened. I let the blinds fall back into place. I stood there in the dim light of my living room, clenching my fists. I considered leaving, maybe checking into a hotel, but I didn't want to run. This was my home. I tried banging on my own window, shouting, demanding it go away. I got no response. I unplugged my TV and faced the window, hoping the lack of electric light would help. It did nothing. The shape remained. Eventually I sat down with my back to the wall and just waited. Hours passed. I dozed off a few times. Each time I woke, I smelled that sour scent. My neck was stiff, my legs cramped. I avoided looking at the window. Around 3 in the morning, I stood up and raised the blinds fully. I wanted to face it. I looked out, and for the first time the figure seemed to move slowly back, fading into the darkness. The window across went dark again. I listened. No tapping, no creaking. I pressed my forehead to my own glass and stared at the empty darkness outside. The pressure in my ears lessened and I breathed easier. I stood there for a long time, waiting for it to return. It didn't. I'm still here. I haven't told anyone the full truth. I keep my blinds down most nights, but sometimes I sense it in the room. I feel the sour smell and hear soft creaks in the floor. When I lift the blinds, sometimes I see just darkness. Other times I see it standing in that opposite window. It looks a bit more like me each time, like it's adjusting itself. It never moves in sync with me. It never imitates my gestures. It just watches. I don't know what it wants. All I can do is wait and hope it never crosses that boundary. For now, it seems stuck on the other side. But I feel it here in the air around me, pressing closer. I'm not sure how long I can stand it. I moved in 2 days ago. I paid for a full month of quiet work far from the city. The house looked fine at first. It had enough rooms for me to spread out my notes and research materials. It had thick doors and what seemed like well-insulated walls. I expected silence. I expected privacy. I did not expect the sound from the attic. I noticed it the first night, late. I was setting up my laptop in the main study on the second floor. I heard a soft moaning sound coming from above. It was constant, low and muffled. It never got louder or stopped. At first I ignored it, thinking it might be pipes or wind. But after listening more carefully, I realized it was not a pipe. It sounded like a human voice. There were no clear words, no cries, just a long, unbroken moan. I followed the sound up the stairs to the attic door. I found it locked with thick old chains. The door was made of heavy wood and the chain was secured with 2 large bolts and a rusted padlock. I pressed my ear against the wood. The moaning was right behind that door. I knocked. The sound did not change. I called out. There was no response. I tried the doorknob. It did not move. I decided to leave it for the night. I went back down to the bedroom and tried to sleep. The moaning passed through the floorboards and into my ears. I tossed and turned, trying to cover my head with a pillow. The sound still reached me. It never rose or fell. It stayed at the same volume and tone all night. In the morning, I walked through the halls to get a sense of the place. It was large, with old-fashioned furniture, high ceilings, and narrow hallways. The floors creaked under my steps. Dust floated in the air. The windows were tall and let in bright light. Everything looked normal, except for that moaning above me. I noticed I could still hear it during the day, though it blended slightly with normal daytime sounds. I searched for a key. I opened drawers in the kitchen, the study, and the living room. I found old papers, receipts, and useless junk, but no attic keys. I tried calling the landlord, but there was no answer. I left a voicemail asking about the attic, but received no reply. I tried to focus on my work. I opened my laptop and tried to write. The moaning distracted me every time I typed a sentence, that low, continuous sound getting under my skin. I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening. I decided I needed to see what was in there. By late afternoon, I was in the upstairs hallway again, facing the attic door. I pushed and pulled on the chain, but it did not loosen. I tapped the door with a screwdriver. I put my ear against it again. The moaning continued. I tried to slip the tip of the screwdriver between the door and the frame, but had no luck. I needed heavier tools. I searched the storage room on the ground floor, finding a hammer, some pliers, and a crowbar. I took them upstairs. I tried using the crowbar on the door frame. The wood was thick and old, and it barely moved. The chain rattled a bit, but stayed in place. I tried hitting the padlock with the hammer. It left a dent, but nothing more. As I worked, I felt uneasy, keeping seeing something move at the edge of my vision. I would turn my head quickly to see nothing, just a shadow or shape sliding along the corner of the hallway. I shook my head and tried to focus, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At one point, I looked up at the ceiling again. It seemed to dip slightly, as if it were moving. I reached up and touched it. It felt solid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was aware of me. When night fell, the house got colder. I turned on every light I could find. I walked around, shining my flashlight into corners under furniture, behind doors. There was nothing, no animals, no other people. Still, I felt uncomfortable. The moaning sound never stopped. I ate a quick meal in the kitchen, barely tasting it. Then I went upstairs again, determined to find a way in. I tried talking through the door again. "Is someone in there?" I said. "Do you need help?" The moaning did not change. I listened carefully. I heard no breathing, no movement, just that endless tone. I tried to think of something else. Maybe it was air moving through old vents. Maybe it was a faulty pipe. I knelt and put my ear to the floor. The sound came from above, not below. I went back to the storage room and found a ladder. I carried it upstairs and looked for a crawl space, or hatch. I found a small access panel in the hallway ceiling. I set the ladder up, climbed it, and opened the panel. Dust fell on my face, making me cough. I shone the flashlight inside. It was a tight space with wooden beams and old insulation. The moaning got louder when I stuck my head in. I crawled inside with difficulty. The beam pressed against my back. The air was stale. My flashlight beam showed dust, wood, and some pipes. I moved slowly, trying not to make any noise. The moaning surrounded me. I followed the sound and found a spot where I could see through a small gap in the wood. Below me should be the attic room. I could see something in the darkness below. I tried to shine the light through the gap, but the angle was bad. I saw only part of a floor and a lump in a corner. I heard a scraping sound behind me. I turned around quickly. Nothing was there, just darkness and beams. I felt a slight vibration under my hand. The wood felt warm, which made me pull back my hand. I crawled backward, feeling uneasy. It was too cramped up there. The constant moaning got into my head, and I felt my heart beating faster. I backed out of the crawl space and climbed down the ladder. Back in the hallway, I tried another tactic. I aimed my flashlight at the chain and examined the bolts. They were old and rusty. Maybe I could remove them with pliers. I gripped one bolt and twisted. It resisted at first, but then turned slightly. I kept working, my arms shaking with effort. The bolt screeched as I turned it. Eventually, it came loose. I moved to the second bolt and did the same. After several minutes, I got the second bolt loose. The chain hung slack. The door still would not open fully. The padlock kept the chain looped, even though it was loose. I tried slipping the chain off the door handle. It was tight. But after some pushing and pulling, the chain dropped to the floor. Now the door was free, except for the padlock still attached to a loose link. I pushed the door gently. It opened a few inches with a crackling sound from the old wood. I shone the flashlight inside. The moaning grew louder. Dust swirled in the flashlight beam. The room was small, with bare wooden walls and a low ceiling. In one corner, I saw a large wooden crate covered by a heavy cloth. I stepped inside slowly. The floor creaked. The moaning seemed to come from near the crate. I approached it, breathing quickly. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My throat was dry. I crouched and lifted the cloth. Underneath, I found an old vent cover set into the floorboards. The sound was coming from behind that vent. I tried to lift the vent cover. It was stuck. I pried it with my screwdriver, and it popped off with a slight squeal. The moaning rushed up through the open vent. I shone my flashlight down. I saw darkness in what looked like old pipes. The sound echoed from below. I tried calling out, but there was no reply or change. I stuck the tip of a thin metal rod I had used as a tool through the vent. I felt something give way, then push back. I pulled the rod out. The tip was damp and smelled strange. I wiped it on my pants and looked again into the vent. It was just dark and deep. I saw no shapes, no movement, nothing else. The moaning never stopped. I realized that I couldn't stop this sound. It came from somewhere deep below or inside the structure. I had no idea how to access it. I was already shaken by the strange feeling I got inside this house. The shadows in the corners, the uneasy warmth in the beams, the shifting ceiling. I decided I didn't want to dig any deeper. If there was something down there, I couldn't reach it, and it didn't seem interested in talking to me. I left the vent open. I left the cloth and crate where they were. I stepped back into the hallway. My legs felt weak. I closed the attic door behind me. I didn't bother replacing the chain. I stood there for a moment, listening. The moaning was now clearer, not muffled. It spread through the hallway. I couldn't escape it, but at least I knew what was in there. Just a vent in the floor. I went downstairs to the kitchen and drank another glass of water. I tried to calm down. My heart was still pounding. My arms were sore from prying bolts and hammering at the door. I could still hear the moaning, just quieter from down here. I decided to work in the living room, as far from the attic as possible. I sat at a small desk near a window and opened my laptop. I could still hear the sound. It never ended, never changed. I tried to type, focusing on the project I had come here to complete. I could feel my muscles tense. I expected to see shadows slide across the room again, but I kept my eyes on the screen. I expected the walls to creak and the ceiling to shift, but I ignored it. I just typed, letting that constant moaning fill the background. I had paid for a month. I would stay and I would work. The sound wouldn't stop and I had no way to stop it. All I could do was keep writing and hope that somehow I would get used to it. I still remember the first time I noticed the crack in the wall. It was a thin line near the edge of my living room, about the length of my hand. The building was old and had some charm, but I wasn't expecting the walls to split open. I had just moved in after my divorce. I had no kids, no pets, nothing. It was just me, a few boxes in that narrow living room facing a silent street. The building had an Art Deco style, with some chipped paint in the hallways and a musty smell near the elevator. I didn't care about that. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. Instead, I got that crack. When I first saw it, I didn't think much of it. The paint around it was peeling. The plaster looked weak. The landlord had warned me that the place was old and might need some touch-ups. I figured I could ignore it for a while. I was tired and needed to unpack. Over the next few days, I put my furniture in place. I arranged my couch in front of the TV, set up a small coffee table, placed a lamp in the corner. I tried to make the place feel like home. I didn't look at the crack much, but every time I did, I had this uneasy feeling. It looked a bit longer. Or maybe I was imagining things. I wasn't sure. I don't have great eyesight, and my head was full of other worries. Still, something about it bothered me. On my fourth night in the apartment, I was sitting on the couch eating takeout and watching some late-night show. It was quiet outside. The building made occasional creaks. Then I noticed a faint glow coming from the crack. It was a weak, dull light, like a small LED hidden deep inside the wall. I leaned forward, put my food down and squinted at it. I could see the hairline of the crack shining. It wasn't bright, it didn't illuminate the room. It was just there, a thin thread of light. I turned off the TV and lamp to see better. The crack glowed. I pressed my ear against the wall. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound, almost like slow footsteps. I pulled back. My heart was beating faster. Sweat formed on my forehead. I didn't hear any voices, just that shifting noise as if something paced back and forth inside the wall. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I tried not to think about it. Maybe there were old wires in the wall. Maybe it was the neighbor's TV. Maybe I'd imagined the glow. I got up, checked the living room, and it was dark and quiet. The crack was still there, silent now. I went back to bed. The next morning, I measured the crack with a piece of tape. I pressed the tape from one end to the other and made a small mark on it. I wanted to see if it would grow. I went to work, feeling uneasy but tried to forget it. That day was normal. I came home around 6. The hall smelled like old carpet. The elevator made a grinding noise. Inside my apartment, everything was where I left it. I rushed to the living room and looked at the tape. The crack was longer by at least an inch. I stood there, my mouth half open. A tightness settled in my chest. I ran my finger along the crack. The plaster around it felt softer, a bit damp. I pressed gently and swore I felt a slight give, as if the wall was pushing back. I decided to call the landlord. I explained that there was a crack growing in my wall. He said the building was old, that sometimes plaster expands or contracts, and he'd send someone in a few days. I insisted it was getting bigger fast. He said he'd try to get someone earlier, but no promises. I hung up and paced the floor. I checked the other walls. Nothing. I checked the ceiling. Nothing. I took a pen and poked the plaster inside the crack. It felt warm. Not hot, but warmer than the rest of the wall. My hands were shaking. I stepped back and looked around. Everything else looked normal. I heard normal traffic outside. A car horn, a distant siren, a couple talking in the hallway. I closed my door and locked it. Around 10 p.m., I turned off all lights and stared at the crack. It was glowing again, that faint light pulsing very softly. I couldn't see a source. It was as if the light came from deep inside. I heard a rustling sound, reminiscent of slow footsteps on loose floorboards. The noise was irregular and distant. I couldn't tell if it was moving closer or staying in one place. I put my ear closer again, but the sound stopped. My breath was shallow. I felt my heart thudding in my ears. Then I heard a soft tap from inside. I jumped back, tripped over the coffee table, and nearly fell. I turned on the lamp. The crack looked the same as before, except for the glow. I tried to stay calm. I drank some water and sat on the couch, watching it from a distance. I went to bed late and slept poorly. I kept waking up thinking I heard scraping. In the morning, the crack had grown another inch. The plaster flaked off easily now, and the edges of the crack had spread into twisted shapes like uneven branches. I pressed my hand on the wall again. It was still warm. I tried to ignore it and went to work. At the office, I couldn't focus. I just kept picturing that glowing line. I left early and came home while it was still daylight. With the lights on, the crack looked ordinary, just a bit bigger. I tapped the wall with my knuckles. I felt a slight vibration. Although I didn't hear anything else, I remained uneasy. The landlord said a maintenance guy would come tomorrow. Before going to bed, I set up my phone to record video throughout the night. I turned off all the lights and let it record while I stayed in my bedroom. I couldn't sleep anyway. I kept thinking about the noises. At around midnight, I got out of bed and went back to the living room. The crack was glowing again. This time the glow was steady, not flickering. I walked closer slowly, held my breath, and listened. The footsteps were back, soft and irregular, as if someone was pacing inside a narrow corridor. I tried to speak. I said hello, but got no reply. Just a pause in the steps. Then they continued. I stepped back, turned on the lamp, and the sound stopped again. The glow dimmed when the light was on, but I could still see it if I looked closely. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a small screwdriver and tried chipping away at the plaster. I wanted to see what was inside. I chipped off a piece near the edge. Beneath it was old, dark wood. I tried to make a hole big enough to peek inside. The moment I removed a chunk of plaster, the glow went out. I shone my flashlight inside the hole and saw nothing but old wood and darkness. I felt a slight breeze. It smelled stale. I couldn't see any wiring or pipes. The footsteps were gone. I waited for a minute and heard nothing. I covered the hole with duct tape and went to bed. The next morning, the maintenance guy came. He was in his 40s, had a rough face, a dusty baseball cap, and carried a toolbox. I showed him the crack. He looked at it, shrugged, and said something about old buildings settling. I insisted it had grown. He pulled off some plaster, exposing the wood beneath. He tapped on the wood. It sounded hollow. He said there might be a small space behind the wall. Maybe the building had old ventilation shafts. He didn't seem concerned. He said he'd come back tomorrow with some materials to fill and seal the crack. I asked him about the glowing. He looked at me like I was making it up. I showed him the spot I had taped. He said it was probably some strange reflection from outside lights. I mentioned the footsteps. He just shrugged and said, "Old buildings make weird noises." He left. All day I waited for night to come. I felt anxious and on edge. I went outside for a walk just to clear my head, but I ended up just circling the block. There were people sitting in a nearby cafe reading newspapers or chatting. Nobody looked nervous or strange. I stood in the lobby of my building for a moment, looking at the old receptionist desk and the dusty chandelier. The hallway smelled of old wood polish. I felt a knot in my stomach thinking about my apartment. I went back up. I ordered pizza and ate it in silence, staring at the wall. The crack was bigger now that some plaster had been removed by the maintenance guy. The exposed wood looked dark and dry. The duct tape I had placed was still there on the hole I made. I removed the tape and checked inside again with my flashlight. Still nothing visible, just emptiness. I put my ear inside the hole. It was silent. I waited for hours, sitting on my couch, lights off. Around 11 p.m., I saw the glow again. This time it came not only from the thin crack lines that were left, but also faintly through the hole I made. I pointed my flashlight in again. The glow vanished. I turned the flashlight off. The glow reappeared. I said, "I know you're in there." I waited. I got no answer, just the slow shuffling of those footsteps. They sounded like bare feet on a wooden floor. I felt sweat rolling down my neck. My stomach was tight. I tried to keep my voice steady.
"I'm not going anywhere," I said.
I heard a soft thump, then silence again. I leaned closer, holding my breath. I wanted to see something, but I couldn't. I grabbed the screwdriver again. I widened the hole a bit more, pushing aside more plaster and wood. I made a hole about the size of my palm. The glow flickered when I did this. I felt warm air hitting my face. The footsteps grew faster, then stopped. I stuck my flashlight inside.
"Nothing there. Just darkness."
But the space seemed deeper than I expected. I could push the flashlight a bit in and see old beams, some wiring and empty space. No sign of anything living. I pulled the flashlight back out. When I turned it off, the glow returned. It seemed to come from the far end of the space. I couldn't reach it. I heard a clicking sound like someone tapping their nails on wood. I stepped back and rubbed my arms. I felt goosebumps all over. I tried to call the landlord again, but he didn't pick up. I paced around the living room checking my phone. No signal issues. It just wasn't answering. I sat down and kept watching the glow. The glow was steady, and I could still hear that soft tapping. I tried to ignore it and think of something else, but I couldn't. My heart was racing, and my legs felt weak. Eventually, I got up and dragged my couch away from the wall. I placed a chair near the hole and sat there, facing it. My phone was ready to record again. I turned on the video and aimed it at the hole. I hoped to catch something moving, some proof of what I was hearing. I waited, holding the phone steady, trying not to make any noise. After a few minutes, I heard the footsteps again, this time moving slowly. The glow flickered, and I heard a faint rustling sound. Then the footsteps stopped right behind the wall. My chest tightened. I leaned forward and whispered, "Who are you?" No answer, just a slow, heavy exhale. It sounded like breathing. Something was breathing in there. I could hear it inhale and exhale through the hollow space. It was steady and calm, as if it knew I was listening. I recorded the sound with my phone. My hand was shaking, but I kept it pointed at the hole. The breathing continued for maybe a minute. Then it stopped. The glow faded a bit. I was sweating, and my mouth felt dry. I decided to reach inside again, this time just my fingertips feeling around the edges of the hole. The wood was rough and splintered. I got a small splinter in my index finger. I cursed under my breath and pulled my hand out. I looked at my finger. A tiny drop of blood formed. I wiped it on my jeans. Then I heard a light scraping sound inside. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I shone the flashlight again. Nothing. I turned it off, and the glow returned. It didn't make sense. I stayed up until dawn, watching the hole. The breathing never came back that night, but I kept hearing soft taps and occasional footsteps, moving back and forth. The glow stayed constant. It wasn't bright enough to light up the room, but it was there. When morning came, I turned on all the lights and checked the video on my phone. The sound was faint, but I could hear the breathing and some tapping. I felt relieved that I had some proof. Later that day, the maintenance guy came back. I showed him the video. He said it was probably old pipes or maybe wind and some hidden ductwork. He filled the crack with a sealing compound and patched up the plaster. He painted it over with a coat of primer. He said that should fix the problem. Before he left, I asked him if he knew what was behind that wall. He said he didn't. It was probably just a gap between apartments. Something sealed off years ago. When he was gone, I pressed my ear against the freshly sealed wall. No sound, no glow. It looked solid. That night, I turned off the lights and waited. The wall was quiet, no glow, no footsteps. I sat there in the dark for hours staring. Nothing happened. I went to bed. I couldn't sleep well, but eventually I dozed off. Around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling thirsty. I walked to the living room. The wall was dark and silent. I checked it with my flashlight. The patch job looked fine. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I stared for a few more minutes, then went back to bed. The next morning, I touched the wall again. It felt normal. I didn't hear anything or see any light. The crack was gone. Still, every time I walked past that spot, I felt uneasy. I couldn't stop thinking about that breathing. The sound of footsteps behind the wall stayed in my mind. I didn't tear it open again. I didn't talk about it to anyone else. I stayed in that apartment a few more weeks, always waiting to hear something. But I never did. The glow never returned and the wall stayed sealed. All I had left was that recording on my phone and the memory of that strange feeling whenever I stood in front of the wall. I never got an explanation for any of it, and I never tried to break through that wall again. It stayed quiet, and I kept my distance. That was enough. I shut the cabin door with force and pressed my back against it, holding it there for a moment. I felt my legs shaking a little. The day was almost over, but the light outside was still enough to see the tree line. Thick fog hung between the trunks, making the pines look taller and darker. I had chosen this place because I wanted quiet. I needed to step away from everything. Instead, I stood in a small wooden cabin with no electricity, just a weak flashlight and a few candles, feeling the air pressing in on me from all sides. The cabin had a single room, a narrow cot, a small wood table, and a few chairs. The floor was uneven. The walls smelled like old wood. There was a tiny window facing north. I had covered it earlier with a rag, trying to keep the cold air out, but it did little good. There was a door facing east, which I had just slammed shut, and a small stovepipe jutting out through the roof for the fireplace. I could smell smoke from the short fire I had lit an hour ago, which was already dying down.
I set my flashlight on the table, aiming its beam at the door.
I had a few candles, but I saved them for when the flashlight batteries ran low. I stood there, trying to listen. The air outside was quiet except for a distant rustling, probably branches and needles shifting in the wind. It was late afternoon, and the sun would set soon. The sky was already turning dull and gray through the trees. The fog crept closer. It felt like a damp blanket around everything. I walked to the window and moved the rag a bit. Through the gap, I saw the pines stretching out in all directions. The ground outside was uneven and covered with fallen needles. My truck was parked about 50 yards away down a rough path, but it was hidden behind a few large trees. I had planned to stay here for several days. I brought enough canned food, a few bottles of water, and a sleeping bag. I had no radio, no phone signal, nothing. I thought isolation would help me calm down. I had been feeling stressed for a long time, and I wanted silence. No machines, no lights, no people. I wanted to breathe slowly and clear my head. But as evening fell, I felt uneasy. I walked outside earlier, just after noon, trying to gather some dry wood. The forest was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. I sensed something watching me. I couldn't explain it. I looked around many times, but I saw no one. Still, I hurried and gathered what I could, then returned to the cabin. Since then, I had stayed inside. The light from the flashlight was weak, so I turned it off and lit a candle. I sat on the cot and tried to relax. I opened a can of beans with my pocket knife and ate them cold. They tasted bland, but they filled my stomach. The darkness outside grew thicker. The candle flame flickered on the rough wooden walls. I tried to keep my breathing slow and steady. Then I noticed movement outside through the window. I stood up and pressed my eye to a gap in the rag. I saw shapes in the fog. They looked like human figures, maybe 3 or 4 of them, standing between the pines. I couldn't make out faces or clothes. They looked like silhouettes. At first I thought it might be hikers passing through, but they didn't hold flashlights, and they didn't carry bags. They were just standing there. I watched them for a minute. They started to move. It was a slow, twisting movement, as if their arms and legs bent in odd angles. I saw them step around each other, turn their heads, and sway. They did this without making any sound. I waited, expecting them to come closer, but they stayed in the same area, maybe 20 yards from the cabin. I kept staring, trying to see details, but the fog and fading light made it impossible. Their silhouettes looked dark gray against the white mist. After a while, I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to breathe normally. I gripped the window frame. The figures kept moving, like a slow dance. They spun and twisted, but not in a graceful way. It looked strange. Their bodies seemed flexible, but I couldn't be sure. At some point I whispered to myself, asking what they were doing. I got no answer, obviously. I tried tapping on the window with my knuckle, making a soft sound, hoping they would notice and say something. They didn't react, they kept moving. I felt a light sweat on my neck. I closed the rag again and stepped back. The cabin felt colder. I looked at my candle. The flame was steady. I picked up my flashlight and turned it on, shining it around inside. Everything looked normal. The cot, the table, the chairs, my small bag of supplies. I decided to open the door a crack and see if I could hear them outside. I turned the doorknob slowly, pulling the door just an inch. Cold air swept in. I heard nothing but the wind. I pushed the door closed again. I sat back down on the cot. My heart was beating fast. I told myself that if they were just people, they would eventually knock on the door or call out, but they didn't. I waited at least 10 or 15 minutes. I got up again and checked the window. They were still there, still moving in that odd way. Their silhouettes blended with the dark trunks behind them. The fog shifted, sometimes revealing a shoulder, bent arm, or tilted head, then hiding it again. They never stepped forward. They never stepped back. I felt trapped inside the cabin, too afraid to walk outside and confront them, too unsure to ignore them. Eventually, I decided to try to sleep. The candle was halfway done. I had a spare one. I lit the second candle and blew out the first. I placed the burning candle inside a small tin can to keep it stable. I lay down on the cot, fully clothed, boots on. The sleeping bag lay rolled up at my feet. I watched the ceiling, just wood planks, some knots and cracks. Nothing else. I couldn't see the silhouettes from my bed. I tried to calm down. I told myself that maybe they would leave after a while. Maybe they were just lost travelers acting strangely. I closed my eyes. I don't know how long I stayed like that. I don't think I slept at first. I drifted in and out of a half-conscious state. I would listen carefully, then drift off, then wake up again. I think the candle burned low. After what felt like hours, I became aware of a sound above me, a soft scratching noise. It sounded like something scraping against the roof shingles. The cabin's roof was just simple wooden boards covered by some tar paper on top. It wasn't thick. I could hear the sound clearly. A slow, irregular scratch. Sometimes it stopped. Sometimes it began again. It reminded me of an animal clawing, but I did not know what kind of animal would climb onto a roof in the middle of the night. I sat up, holding my flashlight. I aimed the beam at the ceiling. I saw nothing, just the wood planks. The scratching continued for a moment, then paused. I stood up from the cot and listened. Then I heard voices. They were muffled, coming from above, maybe at the edge of the roof or just beyond it in the trees. The voices were low and rough. I couldn't understand a single word. They spoke in some language I had never heard before, with harsh consonants and a guttural tone. It sounded like a conversation between at least 2 or 3 individuals. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. My throat tightened. I didn't want to speak. I barely breathed. I pointed the flashlight at the door and waited. The voices continued, sometimes overlapping. They didn't shout. They spoke softly, but with an intensity that made my heart pound. I considered stepping outside with the flashlight to see who it was, but I felt too weak to do that. I felt my legs shaking. I stood there for a long time listening. Then the scratching started again, closer to the stovepipe. The pipe rattled slightly, as if someone or something touched it. I clenched my teeth and waited. I hoped they would go away. I tried to think of what I could do. I had no weapons except a folding knife. I had no phone. I had no idea who these people were. The silhouettes outside had not approached, but now there were voices above me. The cabin felt too small, too exposed. The wood walls and roof offered little protection. I could imagine someone dropping down through the roof if they wanted to. I pressed my back against the wall, near the table, trying to keep my eyes on all sides at once. After some time, the voices faded. The scratching stopped. The wind outside picked up a bit. I could hear branches swaying. I waited, still silent, until I felt certain the sounds were gone. Then I slowly walked to the window and moved the rag. I shone the flashlight outside, sweeping the beam across the pines. I saw heavy fog swirling between the trunks. I did not see the silhouettes now. The area where they had been was empty, just damp ground and scattered needles. I heard no one. I aimed the flashlight upward, trying to see the roof edge. I saw nothing unusual, just darkness and mist. I moved back inside and sat on the cot, pulling out my sleeping bag. I considered leaving the cabin right then and there, walking back to my truck and driving away. But it was late, and the night was thick with fog. The forest floor was uneven. Without a proper light, I might stumble and hurt myself. My flashlight's beam was weak, and I had no headlamp. Also, part of me did not want to step outside after what I had seen and heard. I felt safer inside the cabin, even if just barely. I tried to sleep. I pulled the sleeping bag around my body and lay down facing the door with the flashlight gripped in my hand. I closed my eyes and listened. The night was long. I don't know if I slept or I must have drifted off, because I remember waking suddenly at some point, my heart pounding. Certain that I had heard footsteps outside, I listened carefully. There was nothing, just the wind and an occasional creak of branches. I breathed slowly and tried to relax. At some point, a faint light appeared behind the window rag. Dawn was coming. The grey light of early morning filtered through the cloth. I sat up stiffly, feeling my back ache. The candle had burned down completely. The inside of the cabin was cold. I stood up, stretched my legs, and moved to the window. I moved the rag and looked outside. The fog was still there, but thinner. I saw the pines clearly. I saw the ground. No footprints. No signs of anyone. No silhouettes. The forest looked empty. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The air was cold and damp. I walked around the cabin, looking at the ground, the roofline. I saw no damage, just the usual needles and cones. I saw no tracks. The roof was about 8 feet high, and I couldn't climb it without effort. I stood there, scanning the trees, listening. Nothing. The forest was quiet. I heard some distant bird calls. I walked to where I had seen the silhouettes. There was nothing unusual there. The ground was soft, covered in a thick layer of needles. If anyone had stood there, they left no clear prints. I crouched down and pressed my hand against the ground. It was cold and slightly damp. I smelled the air. I smelled pine and wet wood. No smoke, no sweat, no other odors. I walked back to the cabin and sat on the step. I felt tired. My stomach rumbled. I opened a can of tuna and ate it with my knife. The taste was salty and plain. I swallowed quickly. I sipped some water. I looked around constantly, checking the trees, the edge of the forest, the patches of fog drifting between trunks. Everything seemed normal now, but I couldn't shake the feeling from last night, the silhouettes and the voices. I decided I would stay one more night to see if it happened again. If it did, I would leave at first light the next day. If it didn't, maybe I could still find some peace here. I didn't want to leave too soon. I wanted to believe it was some strange dream or a passing group of strangers who meant no harm. I spent the day chopping a bit of wood with a small hatchet I had in the truck. I dried my boots near the fire inside the cabin. I arranged my supplies, counted my cans, checked my flashlight batteries. I avoided thinking about the night before. I kept my mind on small tasks like stacking the wood neatly, wiping the inside of the cabin door, and tightening a loose hinge on the table. I listened to the forest sounds, a distant creak, a few birds. Everything normal. By late afternoon, the fog thickened again. I stood outside for a while, looking into the haze. Nothing moved. I stepped back inside, lit a candle, and sat down to eat some crackers and jerky. My stomach felt tense, but I forced the food down. As the light faded, I kept an eye on the window. I waited, wondering if I would see those silhouettes again. I waited with my flashlight on the table, ready. The cabin was quiet. My breathing was steady, but my hands were tight around my knees. I would see this through one more time and then decide what to do. The forest still felt alive around me, and I knew I wasn't alone. I stepped into the cave entrance with my headlamp on, and my tripod bag resting against my shoulder. The entrance is damp and narrow, and I can feel cool air against my face. My boots grip the slick limestone floor as I move forward. Water drips somewhere far inside, and the sound echoes back. I'm here to photograph stalagmites and stalactites, and I want a quiet place without any distractions. There's no one else here. I parked my car about a mile away and hiked through thick brush just to reach this place. It's not a tourist spot. It's an old formation known only to a few local climbers. I came for the silence and undisturbed formations. I want to get the kind of shots that make my portfolio stand out, but as soon as I step deeper, I sense that I'm not alone. I push forward through a tight passage, ducking my head and shuffling sideways with my gear. My hands brush the cold stone. It's slippery and I have to pause a few times to keep my balance. I try to focus on the task at hand. I'm thinking about camera settings, low light adjustments, exposure times, and the best angle to catch the mineral deposits. Nothing else should matter. I can't waste time imagining things. The only sound is my own breathing and the quiet drip of water. After a few minutes, the passage opens into a wide chamber with a low ceiling. I lean my tripod against a rock and run my hand over a smooth surface. My headlamp reveals mineral patterns. The formations are beautiful. Some stalactites look like they're inches from touching the stalagmites below. I crouch, adjust my camera, and take a few long exposure shots. The flash from my camera lights the room for a brief moment, then darkness again, except for my narrow headlamp beam. I stay still and listen. Nothing, just silence. I move slowly around the chamber, looking for an interesting angle. I spot a group of stalagmites by a shallow pool of water. I walk over and set up my tripod. I'm steadying the camera when I hear something low and deep. It's like a hum or a chant. I freeze and turn my head. I stand still and listen. I can place the sound. It's coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead, maybe through a smaller tunnel connected to this chamber. I lift my headlamp and shine it forward. I see nothing but wet limestone and a few small puddles. The sound stops. I keep listening. Nothing but the drip of water again. I try to shake it off. Caves can have strange acoustics. Maybe it's just the wind outside or water moving through cracks. I return to my camera and frame a shot of the stalagmites with the reflection in the pool. I hold my breath to avoid camera shake and press the shutter. The flash goes off, capturing the moment. I check the display. The photo is good. Sharp detail, nice reflections. I do a few more shots from different angles. I hear a faint rumbling sound. Not the flash, something else. I stand up straight and grip my flashlight. I sweep the beam across the rocks. Still nothing unusual to see. I focus on the sounds. It's a low vibrating tone. It's not constant, it rises and falls. A kind of deep chant with no clear pattern. It's unnerving. My heart starts to beat faster. I notice my breathing is louder now, and I swallow hard. I don't want to panic. I came here alone, and that was my choice. There's no cell signal, no quick exit. If I panic, I might slip or get lost. I tell myself to stay calm. I decide to move toward the source of the sound just to see if I can understand what it is. I pack my camera and fold my tripod. I walk slowly, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. My boots press into the wet floor, and I feel moisture creeping through the seams. The passage ahead is narrower and slopes downward. I try to keep the beam steady. The air feels heavier down here. The chanting grows slightly louder, but I can pinpoint its location. It seems to echo off the walls. As I continue, I start to feel something else. It's a sensation of being watched. My skin tingles, and there's a tightness in my chest. My hands feel clammy, and my legs feel stiff. I move slower now. The chanting continues. It's not a language I recognize, but more like a sequence of deliberate guttural tones. They sound controlled, not random. I stop and shine my light around. I see rock formations, jagged edges, small pockets in the limestone. Water drips along the walls. Everything looks normal, but I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is out there in the dark looking at me. My breathing becomes shallow. I inhale through my nose, trying to stay steady. My heart pounds in my ears. am not in pain, but I feel pressure in my head. The chanting continues, sometimes quieter, sometimes louder. I step forward again, shining my light into a corner. Nothing. I step to the other side and look between some pillars of stone. Nothing. I can see anything that could produce that sound. I think about leaving. I came here to get good photos. I have some already. Maybe that's enough. This feeling is getting worse. My shoulders feel tense, and my legs are ready to run. I think about the route back. I remember the turns I took. I can retrace my steps. I just need to stay focused. But I'm curious. Is there someone down here? Could it be an animal? A person? The chanting doesn't sound like an animal. It sounds too controlled. A person would show themselves, right? Unless they're hiding. Why would anyone hide in a cave like this? I take a few steps back toward the chamber where I started. The chanting changes pitch. It grows deeper, more intense, then fades again. I pause and look over my shoulder. My flashlight beam flickers slightly as I adjust the angle. I still see nothing but rocks and darkness. The presence feels stronger now. It's like a weight pressing on my back. I feel the hair on my arms stand up. My stomach feels hollow. I don't see a good reason to stay. My photos are fine. I got what I came for. I don't need more shots. The presence isn't friendly. It's not attacking me, but it doesn't feel welcoming. I realize that I've been standing still for too long. I turn toward the exit passage and walk. I move faster now, but I try not to rush. My boots make small splashes in the puddles. I see water dripping from the ceiling. I keep the flashlight aimed ahead, looking for the path I came through. The chanting doesn't stop. It follows me, staying at the same volume. I turn my head slightly and listen. It's as if the sound moves along the walls, circling me. My hands tremble a bit. I grip the flashlight with both hands to steady it. I can feel sweat under my helmet strap. My neck feels stiff. I try to stretch it slightly, but I don't want to lose my balance on the wet floor. I reach the chamber with the stalagmites I photographed. I remember the spot where I placed my tripod. I check the floor for my footprints. They're faint in the dampness, but I can guess the route back. I follow the way I came, heading toward the narrow passage that led me in. As I approach it, the chanting lowers in volume. It doesn't stop, but it becomes more distant. I feel like it's pulling back, letting me go. This confuses me. If the presence wanted to stop me, now would be the time. But nothing stops me. The tension is still there, though. My chest feels tight, and my heart is still pounding. I duck into the narrow passage. The walls press close on my shoulders. I have to turn sideways to get through. The stone is rough against my jacket. I move slowly, sliding my feet forward. I don't look back. I keep my light straight ahead. My breathing is louder in here. The passage magnifies my breathing and the small noises I make. Or I can hear my gear shifting in my bag. I'm aware of every detail. There's no chanting in this narrow space, just my own breathing and the scrape of my clothes on rock. When I reach the other side, I find myself in a smaller chamber that leads to the exit. The air feels lighter here. I know I'm closer to the surface. I stop and listen again. The chanting is faint, barely audible. Maybe it's deeper inside, away from me now. I can still feel that presence in my mind. It's like a memory that won't fade. My body is still tense. I clench my jaw and try to relax it. I blink a few times and flex my fingers around the flashlight. I need to get out. That's all that matters now. I follow the sloping floor upward. I see a faint glow ahead, natural light from the entrance. I move faster, stepping over small rocks and puddles. My boots squeak on the damp surface. I stumble once, but catch myself with my free hand against a rock. I keep going. The chanting is gone now, replaced by the gentle sound of wind outside. I step over a fallen limestone chunk and see the mouth of the cave. It's just ahead, a gray opening to the outside world. When I reach the entrance, I turn off my flashlight and push out into the open air. It's late afternoon. The sun is lower in the sky, and the forest outside the cave is quiet. I stand there for a moment, catching my breath. The tension releases from my shoulders. My heart rate slows down. I wipe sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. The sound of birds in the distance calms me. I think about what happened inside. I don't have any answers. I didn't see anyone or anything unusual except the limestone formations. I only heard that strange chanting and felt a heavy presence. It's still fresh in my mind. My face feels flushed, and my legs feel weak. I'm glad I made it out without slipping or getting hurt. I walk away from the cave, pushing through the brush and heading toward where I parked. I keep my eyes on the ground, making sure I don't trip over roots or stones. My gear feels heavier than before. My shoulders are sore from tensing up inside that cave. I'm thirsty, but I wait until I'm a safe distance away to take a drink from my water bottle. I just want to put some space between me and that place. As I move along the forest floor, I look back once. The cave entrance is small and dark. It looks harmless from here, just another limestone formation in a remote area. But I know what I felt inside. I don't plan on going back. The photos I took will have to be enough. I keep walking. My boots crunch on fallen leaves outside the cave area. The tension in my body is fading, replaced by relief. I survived an encounter with something I don't understand. I have no proof of what I heard, just my memory of that low guttural sound, and the feeling of being watched. I don't need to prove anything. I just want to get back to my car and leave this place behind. I climb over a small ridge and see the faint shape of the dirt road where I left my car. I'm breathing steadily now. I'm tired, and my legs ache. I reach the car and set my gear inside. Before I start the engine, I sit behind the wheel and take a long drink of water. The sound of the forest around me is normal and calm. No chanting, no heavy presence, just wind and distant birds. I start the car and drive away. The tension slowly disappears with each mile I put between myself and that cave. I don't look back. I'm done with that place. The memory will stay with me, but I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm just glad I got out. I started working late in the historical library because the regular hours never gave me enough time. I needed to examine a large collection of old documents that few people cared about. Nobody paid much attention to the top floor, where some of the oldest books were kept on dusty shelves. That floor had a window at the far end. No one opened it. It faced a quiet street. Outside, there was nothing to stand on, no balcony, no ledge, and no fire escape, just empty space. I knew that window well. I passed by it many times without even looking. It was always locked from the inside. The frame was thick, and the glass was slightly warped. One night, I noticed something strange. I had been working on a stack of records and letters for hours. The lights in the library were dim, and the night outside was quiet. I got up and stretched my neck. Then I walked around the top floor, feeling the ache in my shoulders. I approached the window without particular reason. I didn't expect to see anything there. When I looked through the glass, I saw a pale face staring back at me. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. I saw a face with light skin. The eyes were empty. They weren't closed or missing. They just didn't contain any life. The figure was pressed close to the glass, looking straight at me. Its hair seemed thin and colorless. Its cheeks had no color, and its skin looked flat and dull. The figure just hung there outside the window with no support. I couldn't see anybody below the shoulders. It looked like a head and part of a torso, suspended in midair. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. I couldn't see any movement. The figure didn't blink. The eyes stayed locked on mine. I felt my legs stiffen. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I knew there was no platform out there. This was the top floor. The figure shouldn't have been able to stand there. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't move for a few seconds. My breathing became shallow. My forehead felt cold. My hands were clenched. I backed up a step, and the figure remained there right behind the glass. I backed up another step and another until I was several feet away. Then I turned around. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I felt a chill in my stomach. I tried to tell myself that I had been mistaken. I walked around the shelves, pacing. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed slowly. I went back to the desk and looked at the old documents spread out in front of me. They were in a language I barely understood. Old letters from some local figure centuries ago. The handwriting was hard to read. The ink had faded. The text included names of places that no longer existed. It mentioned rituals, ceremonies, and strange gatherings that didn't match any official records. As I resumed my work, I kept glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't stop thinking about that face at the window. I tried to ignore it. I focused on deciphering a few words and trying to understand a phrase. As I read, I began to sense something behind me. I thought I heard a soft sound, like a faint breath, but not exactly. I turned around, and the room was empty. There was no one there. I saw only bookshelves, chairs, desks, and dim lamps. The window looked empty now. I could see the dark night sky through it, with no figure in sight. I tried to laugh it off in my head, but my throat was dry. I decided to leave soon. It was late anyway. I locked up my notes and left the building. I walked home, looking over my shoulder at every corner.
I couldn't sleep well that night.
My dreams were full of blank eyes and pale skin. The next day, I returned in the late afternoon. I tried to work during normal hours. The library was calm, as always. A few people came and went. Nobody bothered me. I spread the documents on the table and started reading again. I tried to translate some passages. They mentioned a certain object, a kind of artifact, but I couldn't grasp the details. My understanding felt unstable. Every time I thought I understood a word, it seemed to change in my head. The letters looked twisted, and the shapes of the characters seemed off. I rubbed my eyes and tried again. The words were old and obscure, but I was trained for this kind of task. It should not have been that hard. I began to hear those soft sounds again. I looked around, and the other people in the library didn't seem to notice anything. They were busy with their own work. I walked upstairs to the top floor again, telling myself it was to check on a volume I needed. In truth, I wanted to see if the window was normal now. I approached it slowly, feeling my chest tighten. I looked through the glass and saw only the quiet street below and distant buildings. No figure. I tried the latch. It was locked. The glass felt cold under my fingertips. He returned to the documents. As I read, I noticed that my comprehension was slipping. Words I had translated before seemed to mean something else now. I felt confused. I double-checked my reference materials, and my notes looked correct, but my mind felt cloudy. I heard that soft, steady sound again. It was like breathing, but not mine. It didn't match my own breaths. It felt close to my ear. I looked around. Nobody was standing near me. The other researchers were on different floors or in distant sections. I tried to ignore it. Later that night, I had to stay late again. I had a deadline for my research and couldn't leave now. The library staff allowed me to stay as long as I needed, since I had special permission. Around midnight, the building was empty except for me. I kept the lights on only in the area I was using. The rest of the place fell into darkness. I worked slowly, trying to piece together some coherent meaning from the old documents. My head hurt, and I kept thinking about the figure at the window. I sensed that it was aware of what I read. It felt like it was trying to guide my eyes. Whenever I stumbled on a strange word, I felt a slight pressure in my ears. My vision blurred. Then I would see a faint shape at the edge of my vision. It would disappear if I looked directly at it. I tried to stay calm and got up, walking around the top floor again, keeping my distance from the window. I didn't want to see that face again. My stomach felt tense, my shoulders were stiff, and my back hurt. I wiped sweat from my forehead. The library wasn't hot, but I felt warm and unsettled. I drank some water from a bottle I had with me. I listened carefully, hearing only my footsteps and the hum of the old lights. When I returned to my desk, I found that the documents were no longer in the order I had left them. I was sure I had placed them in a neat stack. Now they were spread out, slightly rearranged. I couldn't figure out if I had forgotten how I left them or if something else had happened. I checked the doors. They were locked, and looked around the shelves. Nothing seemed out of place. I reminded myself that I was alone. I sat down and tried to continue. The words were difficult. Each time I looked at a line, I felt a strange tension in my neck, and my eyes watered. The handwriting seemed to shift, and I thought I heard a quiet whisper. The whisper didn't form any words I knew. It sounded like broken syllables. The voice was soft and steady. It didn't come from any particular direction, and it felt like it was inside my head. My heart beat faster. My fingertips tingled. I stood up and moved away from the desk. I looked at the window. I wanted to know if the figure was there. I didn't want to see it, but I had to check. I walked slowly to the far end of the floor. I stopped a few feet away from the glass and looked. The figure was there. It was pressed against the glass, staring at me. The eyes were still empty. I could see the pale skin more clearly now. There were no wrinkles, no blemishes, just a smooth, colorless surface. The figure's mouth was closed. The lips were thin. I couldn't detect any movement. There was no sign of breathing. Yet I heard the whisper again. It was steady and low, as if spoken through a wall. I stepped back. I breathed through my nose, trying not to panic. I felt a pressure behind my eyes. I reached for the nearest shelf to steady myself. I looked away from the window. The whispering stopped. I turned around and looked at the window again. The figure remained unmoving. I felt my stomach tighten. I couldn't understand what it wanted. It was as if it were waiting for me to continue reading. It was as if it needed me to look at those documents, to process those words. I didn't know why. I only knew that my understanding of the text was unclear. Every time I tried, my mind locked up. I returned to the desk. I forced myself to read another line. The whispering returned. It was slow and steady, matching the pace of my reading. I focused on a single sentence. My head felt heavy. My arms were weak. I tried to write down my translation, but my hand trembled.
The pencil slipped.
I managed to write a few words, but they didn't make sense to me. I wanted to stop, but a strong curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to know what these documents said. I needed to finish my research. I flipped through the pages. Some sections were unreadable. The ink had faded. In other sections, I thought I understood a phrase, but then the letters seemed to rearrange themselves in my mind. I tried covering part of the page with my hand. I tried reading the words one by one. The whispering continued, making me doubt my own memory. I tried speaking out loud. My voice echoed in the empty room. I said a few words slowly, and the whispering paused. Then it started again with a slight change in tone. It felt like the presence outside the window was reacting to what I said. I got up and walked over to the window once more. I looked at the figure and spoke clearly. I don't understand what you want. The figure didn't move. Its eyes remained locked on me. I pressed my hand against the glass. It felt cold. I felt a slight vibration, as if something was pushing back. The whispering faded into a soft hiss. I waited. Nothing changed. I stepped away and returned to the desk. I stayed in that library for several more hours. I kept trying to read, and each time I did, the whispering guided my eyes to certain lines, certain words. I noticed that the figure appeared only when I focused on certain sections. When I moved to a different set of documents, the whispering was softer. When I tried to skip pages, I felt a painful pressure in my forehead. I realized I had to follow a certain path through the text. I didn't know why, but I followed it. As dawn approached, I was exhausted. I had made some progress. I understood a set of instructions in the document, and certain references. I knew that the text described actions taken by people long ago. They had tried to record secret knowledge, sealing something in these words. Though I couldn't grasp all the details, my understanding had changed. The whispering seemed pleased. It slowed down, becoming soft and distant. I looked one last time at the window. The figure was gone, replaced only by the early morning light. I felt drained, my eyes were dry, my hands shook. I packed my notes and left the library. Devantide, the streets were quiet. I breathed in the fresh air. My mind was cloudy, but I didn't feel completely confused anymore. I understood that I had come too close to something unusual. The figure at the window wasn't a normal person. It might appear again, but I didn't know when. I decided to take a break from this project. I needed to rest and calm my nerves. Over the next few days, I avoided the top floor. I worked on other tasks, trying not to think about that presence. Sometimes I hear a faint whisper in my head when I close my eyes at night. Sometimes I feel a slight pressure behind my forehead when I glance at old documents in the library's archives. But I never returned to that window. I left it alone, hoping that the figure would not return. If it did, I was not sure I would be ready to face it again. I start work every night at midnight, alone inside my family's small bakery. The street outside is quiet at that hour. Everything inside is still. The ovens sit cold, and the display cases are empty. But in the basement storage room where we keep the flowers, something moves. Every night I hear it. Uneven footsteps, soft scraping sounds, a faint shuffle that stops as soon as I open the door. I go down those old wooden steps into the dark, flick on the lights, and find nothing. But the signs are there. Shelves pushed into different positions. Flour sacks torn open. Not a single grain of flour is missing, yet the cuts on the sacks are deep and jagged. I see strange patterns on the floor. Streaks of loose flowers, small marks as if something brushed against the surface. No matter how slowly I move, how quietly I descend, I never catch whoever or whatever is there. Something tries to get my attention and lure me deeper. Every time I step on that first creaking stair, my stomach tightens. My muscles get stiff. My heartbeat pounds in my ears. I want to leave. I don't. I keep going back down, night after night, because I need to know what's down there. I stand at the top of the basement steps. It's after midnight. The oven timers are set for early morning batches of bread and pastries. The main floor of the bakery is lit by a single lamp on the far counter. I keep the lights low to save energy and relax. I prefer the quiet hours when no one comes to buy anything. I can focus on preparing dough and getting tomorrow's work in order. But my focus keeps drifting to the basement door. I lean against the wall and listen. There are no voices, just light footsteps that come and go. I can guess the size of the intruder. The steps are not heavy, but they're not soft enough to be a small animal. They move too slowly to be a random creature. They stop and start, pause, then shift direction. I imagine someone down there moving around by shelves of flour and sugar. I don't hear the door opening or anyone breathing. I grip the doorknob and turn it slowly. My shoulder feels tight. The hinge squeaks. I close the door behind me and flick on the basement light. I step down the stairs, each one creaking. The wood is old and dry. My shoes make a dull thud on each step. I hold the railing and keep my eyes on the storage area below. The light is yellow and dim. I installed it to save on costs. But now I regret not putting in brighter bulbs. The concrete floor comes into view. I see the wooden shelves arranged in rows. They are normally aligned straight, but now the first shelf is at an angle. I approach it. The top shelf holds several large sacks of flour, each one labeled and dated. One sack has a long cut across its side. Flour dusts the floor. Nothing else seems changed. I run my hand over the torn sack. The cut is clean. It looks like it was done with a blade. I check the floor for footprints. I see a few faint shapes in the flour dust. I place my foot next to one mark. My shoe is bigger, but not by much. The intruder might have a shoe size close to mine. I stand still and hold my breath. The air smells stale and cool. I hear nothing but the hum of a distant refrigerator upstairs. I walk through each row, checking the shelves, touching the sacks, the boxes, the supplies. Everything is in place except for the rearranged shelf and the torn sack. I kneel down and look underneath one shelf. The dusty floor yields only a few stray pieces of twine. Nothing else. I check behind the shelves. They stand about a foot from the wall. Sometimes I see tiny cracks in the plaster, but no holes large enough for a person to slip through. I tap on the wall. It's solid. I consider setting up some kind of camera. I tried once before with my phone, but the footage showed nothing. The shelf moved, but no one appeared. I thought maybe I missed something, but I watched the video 3 times. The shelf slid a few inches as if pushed by invisible hands. I climb back upstairs, lock the basement door, and return to my work. I shape dough into loaves, measure out ingredients for the morning pastries, and wipe down the counters. My neck feels tense. My hands tremble slightly. I keep picturing that cut in the flour sack. I can figure out what the intruder wants. They don't steal anything. They don't damage anything beyond a few tears in the sacks. They change the positions of shelves and leave these subtle marks. It's like they want to be noticed. I glance at the basement door again. I feel a chill run down my spine. I turn on some music to distract myself, but I keep the volume low so I can hear if something moves downstairs. An hour passes. I have trays of dough ready. I check the ovens. Everything is normal on the main floor. Eventually I convince myself to try again. I turn off the music, stand next to the basement door, and listen. There's a faint scraping sound. It stops as soon as I press my ear to the wood. I open the door without warning and flip on the light. I descend quickly this time, trying to catch whoever is down there. The steps creak louder under my sudden weight. The basement looks the same as before, but now a second shelf is slightly off angle. I approach it and see that one of the lower sacks is cut. The floor has a thin line of flowers trailing toward the far corner. I follow the flower trail. It leads me near the corner where the walls meet. There's a stack of old boxes there, stuff we rarely use. I move one box aside and see a narrow gap behind it. It's just a small space where 2 walls don't align perfectly. The gap is a few inches wide. I shine a flashlight into it, but I see nothing but darkness. The beam of light hits a rough surface. There might be a recess in the wall. I push another box aside. The dust irritates my nose and I sneeze, wiping my face. My heart pounds and I feel sweat on my forehead. If someone is hiding here, they must be thin and flexible. That makes no sense. Maybe it's not a person. Could it be an animal? But animals don't use blades. Could it be someone playing tricks on me? One of my relatives messing with me? I doubt it. They have no reason to sneak around at night, and the bakery is locked. I decide to block the gap. I move the heaviest box in front of it. If something is crawling in and out, it will have trouble now. I spend the next few hours working upstairs, keeping quiet and stopping the music. I listen for any sound but hear nothing. By the time the dough is ready for the ovens, I feel calmer. I think I found the intruder's path. I wonder if they will try something new tomorrow night. When I finish my shift and the sun starts to rise, I feel tired and uneasy. I lock up and leave. The next night, I return at midnight. I start my routine, mixing dough, measuring flour, preheating ovens. The basement door remains closed. After about an hour, I hear a single creak from below. I grab a heavy flashlight and quietly open the basement door. I take slow steps down. The light is already on this time, and I left it on. I see that the heavy box I placed before has been moved an inch to the side. Just an inch, not enough to get through, but it shifted. I touch it. It feels solid and heavy. I put my shoulder into it and try to push it back. While I'm leaning against it, I hear a faint click behind me. I spin around and see a shelf wobbling. The shelf stands in the middle of the floor. Nothing touching it yet, but it tilts slightly. I rush over and hold it steady. The moment I hold it, I feel a quick rush of air on my face, like something passing by. I shine my flashlight around. Nobody is there. I pull the shelf away from the wall to inspect it. On the back, I notice a scratch. A fresh mark on the wood. It's not a letter or symbol, just a short vertical line about 2 inches long. I check other shelves and find another mark. This time it's on a different shelf. A similar scratch. It's like someone is leaving signs. I run my finger along the scratch. It's rough and shallow. I can guess the purpose. I consider calling someone, but who would believe me? I think about calling the police, but I have no crime here. Nothing is stolen or destroyed in a serious way. Just strange marks and rearranged shelves. They would think I'm losing my mind. I set my flashlight down and try to focus on the task at hand. I need to find proof. I need to catch this intruder in the act. I decide to stay in the basement for a while. I pull a stool from the corner and sit near the stairs. I turn off the overhead light and rely on my flashlight. The darkness makes my pulse quicken. I feel vulnerable. My skin tingles. The air is colder down here. The smell of flour and old wood surrounds me. I sit in silence, listening. After several minutes, I hear a gentle tap. It's soft, like a knuckle against wood. I shine the flashlight toward the shelves. They are still. I stand up and walk slowly, step by step, around the basement perimeter. The walls are plain. The floor is concrete. I check the gap behind the boxes again. The heavy box is still there, barely moved. I push it tight against the wall. My shoulder aches from the effort. Then I hear another tap, this time on the far side of the room. I walk over. Nothing is out of place. I stand still, waiting. A sudden rustling sound comes from behind me. I spin around and the beam of my flashlight catches a dust cloud in the air. I see flour drifting down as if stirred up by movement. I rush over and run my hand through the air. I feel nothing. My breathing is quick and shallow. I rub my eyes. The basement seems dead still. The dust settles on my clothes and on the floor. I step back and think. Something wants me to find something down here. The rearranging of shelves, the cuts in the sacks, the shifting boxes, the scratched marks. They must be signals. I start searching more thoroughly. I run my hands along the lower parts of the walls. Eventually I find a loose board near the floor, hidden behind a stack of crates. It's a wooden plank covering a small hole in the wall. I pull the plank. It creaks. Behind it there is a tiny compartment. Inside the compartment, I see a small, old wooden box. I pull it out carefully and set it on a shelf. I shine the flashlight on the box. It has a simple latch. I open it. Inside, I see several old papers, folded receipts, old delivery notes, and a list of flour suppliers from decades ago. I see a few old business cards from people I don't recognize. They must be from when my family first opened this bakery. There's no treasure, just old documents. I flip through them. They smell musty. Some names and addresses are smudged. I notice that some old pricing notes are much lower than today. It's just a piece of history, something hidden away for some reason. I return everything to the box and close it. As soon as I latch the box, I sense a shift in the room. The silence feels less heavy. The air feels normal. I walk around the basement again. Nothing moves. The shelves stay in place. I check the sack of flour again. No new cuts. I stand there for a while waiting. The tension in my shoulders fades. I still feel confused, but I'm calmer now. I carry the box upstairs and place it on the counter. I make sure the front door is locked. I continue working as usual, keeping an eye on the basement door. I don't hear any more footsteps. The night passes without more incidents. Before dawn, I go downstairs one last time and check everything. The shelves are straight, the sacks are intact, and the floor is undisturbed. Over the following nights, I return to my normal routine, mixing dough, preparing pastries, and performing my usual tasks without interruption. The basement remains quiet. Each night, I leave a small piece of tape at the top of the basement door to see if it's opened. While I'm upstairs, the tape never moves. The shelves stay in their proper places, and I don't find any new scratches or cuts in the flour sacks. The hidden compartment remains empty, aside from a bit of dust. I keep the old box of documents in a safe place upstairs. Sometimes I open it and look at the old receipts, wondering why someone hid them. I don't discover anything special, no secrets. They're just old papers. I never find out who or what caused all that commotion in the basement. Whatever it was, it stopped once I found the box. I still work here every night. When I look toward the basement door now, I feel a slight tension, but not the fear I felt before. Sometimes I stand at the top of those stairs and listen for any movement. I hear nothing. The presence is gone, or maybe it's still there, but choosing not to show itself. Either way, my nights are quiet again. I get my work done. I focus on preparing bread and pastries for the morning customers. I still keep the door locked and the lights on downstairs just in case. That's all there is to it. I don't have an explanation. I just know what I saw. Shelves moved, sacks were cut, footsteps were in the dark. I know I found that hidden box and took it upstairs. After that, nothing happened again. Maybe that's what it wanted. Maybe it just wanted me to find those old papers. I can't explain how or why. I only know what I experienced. Now I go through each shift without those strange interruptions. I feel relieved that it's over. If something else ever tries to get my attention down there, I'll be ready. Until then, I'll stick to my routine and keep my eyes open. I never expected to find something like this in a cheap rented studio. I came here just to write my book in peace. I saw the place listed online, a small studio with a desk, a chair, a bed, and a shelf of old books. The price was low. The owner said it had no internet and poor phone reception, but I didn't care. I wanted quiet. I wanted focus. I wanted to finish my damn novel. When I arrived, the first thing I did was drop my backpack by the door. I looked around. The studio was as plain as I imagined. A small wooden desk, a worn-out chair with a faded cushion, a narrow bed with a thin blanket, and a tall dusty shelf pushed against the far wall. The shelf had 3 thick books on it. They had no titles on their spines. They had no covers, just thick blank hard covers with a dull gray color. I touched one. The surface was rough. There were no author, no markings, nothing. I pulled one out and flipped through its pages. The pages were thick and off-white, with no page numbers or publisher name. Nothing. Weird. I didn't bother reading what was inside at first. I had my own work to do. I decided to settle in. I took out my laptop. It had no connection, but that was the point. I sat at the desk, opened a file and tried to write. The silence in the room felt heavy. Outside, I heard distant traffic and the occasional shout from someone passing by on the street below. The window was small and let in only a bit of light. I turned on the desk lamp. The air smelled stale, like old paper and dust. I cracked my knuckles and wrote a few sentences. What? My mind drifted. My attention kept going back to those books. They looked old, but not damaged. Their bindings were intact. I got up and took one of them to the desk. I opened it somewhere in the middle. The text was printed in plain font, black ink, aligned neatly. The first words I read caught me off guard. He stands by the desk holding the book in his left hand, touching the edge of the desk with his right thumb. I froze. I looked down at my hand. I was doing exactly that. My right thumb was tapping the edge of the desk. I looked back at the text. It kept describing me. His eyes flicked to the window, then back to the page. He narrowed his eyes, puzzled. I did narrow my eyes and my heart started pounding. I turned a few pages forward to see if it still matched. It was blank for a while, then more text appeared. It said, "He flips through the pages too fast, frustrated, looking for answers that won't come easily." I stopped flipping. My throat felt dry. I didn't understand how this was possible. The book was describing what I was doing in real time. I looked around the room for a camera or a microphone. I didn't see anything. The light was dim, so I reached for the floor lamp in the corner and turned it on. I expected to see something obvious like a hidden lens. Nothing. Just cracked plaster walls and an old door with paint peeling off. I looked back at the book. The text had changed again. He turns on the floor lamp and scans the walls. He doesn't find any device. I slammed the book shut and put it back on the shelf. My heart was beating hard. I tried to calm down. Maybe it was some kind of trick. Maybe the pages were digital screens. So thin I couldn't tell. I grabbed the book again and held it under the lamp, rubbing my thumb on the paper. It felt like normal paper. No screens, no electronic hum. I took another one of the books from the shelf and opened it. Same thing. It described me standing there, flipping pages, breathing fast. It described the way my shirt stuck to my back from sweat. I checked the back of my shirt with my free hand. It was damp. My mouth went dry. I opened the third book. It started listing things I never told anyone. Personal things about my past. Nothing illegal or dangerous, but private details. It wrote them out as if it had my diary. I shut that book, dropped it on the floor, and stepped back. My skin tingled. My head felt light. I paced around the room, trying to think straight. I didn't want to talk to myself out loud. I tried to keep my thoughts controlled. I reached for my phone. No signal. I moved around the room, holding the phone up, trying to get a bar of reception. Nothing. The owner said it had poor reception, but I hoped I could get some anyway. I wanted to call a friend, someone, anyone, and explain this. But what would I say? I opened the door and looked outside. The hallway was empty. The walls were beige and chipped, lit by a weak overhead bulb. I didn't hear anyone. No footsteps, no voices. I closed the door and locked it. I moved my chair against the door. Not sure why. I just did it. Then I turned back to the shelf. The books were still there. The one I dropped was on the floor, open to a page that read, "He tries to secure himself by blocking the door with a chair. He looks afraid. He is afraid." I slammed it shut with my foot and kicked it back toward the shelf. I didn't like this feeling. I didn't like these books. They knew what I was doing. They knew what I knew. I tried to think of a test. If I moved very slowly, could I catch the words changing? I picked up one of the books and held it close to my face. I saw the words on the page. It said something like, "He lifts the book close to his face, squinting at the text, trying to catch it changing." I kept my eyes on a single word. It was steady for a second. Then, as I breathed, I saw the letters shift, rearranging themselves into a different sentence. The line now read, "He watches the letters shift, but can't understand how it happens." I cursed out loud. My voice sounded loud in a small room. I set the book down on the desk. I tried tearing a page out. I grabbed a page at the corner and pulled. It tore unevenly, leaving half stuck inside the binding. The torn piece in my hand felt like normal paper. I looked at it under the lamp. Just paper. I crumpled it and threw it on the floor. I looked back at the book. The torn page gap now had new text on the next page. He tears a page out. He looks desperate. I tried slamming the book against the desk. The spine cracked, and the cover bent. The text changed. He tries to break the book. He doesn't know what else to do. I stopped and let out a shaky breath. My chest felt tight. I tried to think if I could leave. Maybe I could just walk out of here and never come back. I picked up my laptop in my bag and moved toward the door. The chair was still blocking it, but I lifted it away and tried to open the door. It opened. Nothing stopped me. The hallway was still quiet. I walked out, locked the door behind me, and headed downstairs. The stairwell smelled like mardew. The paint on the railing flaked under my hand. I reached the ground floor and walked outside. The street was normal. A couple of people walking by. A distant car horn. A cat perched on a windowsill. Everything was normal out here. I looked up at the studio's window. I couldn't see inside. I wondered if I should just leave my deposit behind and forget about this place. But my laptop was in my bag now, and I had no other place to write. I needed a quiet spot. and I had nowhere else to go. Also, I felt drawn to figure out what the hell was going on. Those books were impossible. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe hidden speakers or micro cameras were inside the shelf. I walked around the block. I found a small corner store and bought a bottle of water. The cashier looked bored.
I didn't say much.
I drank the water, splashed some on my face in the small bathroom at the back of the store, and then walked back toward the building. When I stepped into the lobby, I realized I felt nervous about returning. I took a slow breath and climbed the stairs again, one step at a time, listening to each footstep echo. At the studio door, I hesitated. Then I put the key in and turned it. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Everything looked the same. The books were still on the shelf except the one I dropped, which was now placed neatly back with the others. I felt a chill. I closed the door behind me. I checked the floor for the torn page. It wasn't there. The floor was clean. No crumpled paper. No sign of my struggle. I walked to the shelf and took out one book. I flipped through it carefully. The text followed my actions again. He returned after leaving for a while. Now, he checks the pages, trying not to panic. I closed it and took another one. This one started listing things I did last week, where I had coffee, what I wrote in my notes on my laptop, how I felt when I received a certain email. All accurate, all private. My hands shook. My breathing was quick. My skin felt clammy. I pulled the chair away from the desk and sat down. I decided to talk directly to the books. I said, "Who's writing this? How can you see me?" I waited. I heard nothing except my own breathing. I opened one book and stared at it. The text said he tries talking to the books. He gets no reply. He feels alone. I cursed again. My head hurt. I touched my forehead and felt a slight throb. I got up and examined the shelf itself, looking for any device. I ran my hand along the back panel. I checked under the desk, under the bed, behind the lamp. Smooth wood, no wires, no seams. The walls were solid. Nothing. No cracks large enough to hide a camera. The ceiling had a single bulb covered by a frosted glass fixture. Just a bulb and some dust. I stood on the chair and took it off. No camera. I sat on the bed and thought about my next move. The text in one of the books started describing what I considered doing next. It said I was thinking about leaving again, maybe staying in a hotel somewhere else. The problem, I had no signal. It said I wanted to call someone I trusted, and I didn't know the neighborhood well enough to find a place with Wi-Fi without wandering around at night. The sun was going down. The room got darker. I turned on the lamp and checked the window. The streetlights were on, and a few people walked by. I saw a guy in a hooded jacket smoking a cigarette. I smelled nothing but stale air and dust inside. I closed the window's curtain. I placed them all on the desk and opened them side by side. I wanted privacy even if it made no difference. The books knew what I was doing anyway. Each one described something different. One described my immediate actions in the room, another described my past actions and seconds, and the third described future actions predicting what I might do next. I tested it by thinking about picking up my laptop. The book predicted that I would stand up and pick up the laptop. I delayed it. I waited a full minute standing still. The book's text changed to admit my hesitation, then described me picking up the laptop anyway. Then I decided to do it anyway. No matter what I did, the books adapted. I felt my stomach twist, my chest was tight, my hands were sweaty. I felt a constant pressure inside my head. I walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall, leaving the studio door ajar. The bathroom was small and smelled of cheap disinfectant. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired. I heard nothing strange. The building was quiet. I splashed water on my face. I leaned my forehead against the mirror. When I came back to the studio, I saw the books exactly as I had left them. They described my trip to the bathroom and what I did there. I checked the pages. I grabbed my laptop and tried to write something. I wanted to ignore the books. Maybe if I focused on my novel, I could pretend this wasn't happening. I wrote a sentence. The studio was silent. I wrote another sentence. I tried to concentrate on my story. After a few minutes, I looked at the books. One of them described me sitting at the laptop, struggling to write, feeling uneasy. It included small details like how I bit my lower lip and tapped my foot. It was all accurate. I slammed my laptop shut. I paced the room. Every movement, every small action appeared in the books. My throat felt tight. I opened the door again and looked out into the hall. I considered knocking on another door in the building, asking if they had seen anything weird. Still empty, but I felt stupid. What would I say? Hey, the books in my rental are spying on me. They'd think I was crazy. I tried walking slowly around the studio, watching the books for changes. They changed anyway, smooth and quick, never lagging. It felt like I was being watched from inside my own head. I decided to leave. I picked up my things. I took a last look at the shelf. I put my laptop in my backpack. They said I would not come back. The books showed me leaving. They said I couldn't handle it. My chest felt heavy. "I'm out." I looked at them and said quietly, "You won." The text shifted. He says he is out. Defeated. I pulled the door open, stepped into the hall and closed it behind me. I didn't lock it. I went down the stairs and out onto the street. The night air felt cool on my face. I looked back once at the window, dark and still. I still felt watched. The memory of those words changing under my eyes wouldn't leave my mind. I held my bag tight and walked away, listening to my own footsteps, feeling my heart beat hard, trying to forget those blank covers and those impossible pages. I kept walking, not looking back again. I moved in yesterday morning. The house felt empty. There were boxes all over the floors, dust on the window frames, and a heavy smell of paint lingering in the hallway. The previous owner had left behind a few old chairs, a table with chipped edges, and a pile of junk in the backyard. I had been too tired to check it all out before sunset, so I waited until the next day. After breakfast, I stepped outside and noticed the yard. It looked bad. The grass was gone, replaced by thick weeds and tangled roots that stuck out of the soil. My boots got stuck in the soft ground as I walked, and I had to pull hard to lift my feet. In the back corner near the fence, I saw a large metal cage. It looked old. The bars were bent and covered in rust. It looked heavier than anything I could lift, and the door was twisted to one side. I had no idea why it was there or who had put it there. I approached it and tapped one of the bars. The sound was dull, and some flakes of rust fell to the ground. I tried to move it. It didn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. I squatted down and looked inside. The interior was empty, just dirt and dried leaves. The top was sealed with thick metal bars. The whole thing looked like it had been abandoned a long time ago. I felt uneasy. There was no reason to keep this cage here. I considered calling someone to remove it, maybe a scrap dealer or a junk removal service. But it was late morning and I needed to unpack and settle in. I had boxes to open, shelves to clean. I left the cage alone and went back inside. That evening I felt tired after carrying boxes and organizing the kitchen. I sat on the old couch and had a soda. The backyard door was open, letting in some fresh air. I had installed a cheap light fixture outside, but it wasn't very bright. I couldn't see the cage from inside unless I angled my head just right. While I sat there, I thought I heard something. It sounded like metal scraping against metal. I got up and walked to the door. I listened. I heard a faint sound like chains rattling. It came from the area near the cage. I leaned forward, trying to see. It was too dark. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and moved slowly toward the cage. As I approached, the air felt different. It felt thick and heavy, and I noticed a strong smell. The smell made me wrinkle my nose. I aimed my flashlight at the cage. Nothing moved. The chains rattling sound had stopped. I looked around carefully. The weeds were still there. I saw no footprints or any signs that someone had been there. The cage looked the same, bent and rusted. I walked a few steps closer and leaned toward the bars. I couldn't see anything inside, just darkness. I waited and listened. I felt my pulse in my neck. My breathing got tight. I whispered a soft hello, but no one answered. I stepped back and decided to head inside. As I turned, I heard the chain sound again. I spun around with the flashlight. I saw the bars trembling a bit, as if something had brushed against them from inside, but I still saw nothing. I took another step toward the cage. The air got thicker. My heart beat faster. I wanted to see if there was a chain inside, but I couldn't see anything. I wiped my forehead. The cage was empty. I looked at the ground for any chains lying around. There were none. I stepped back again and aimed the flashlight straight into the cage. Still nothing. No movement. No shape. No person. I turned off the flashlight for a second and listened. Silence. I turned it back on. Right at that moment, I heard a quiet sound, like a soft grunt or low breath. I felt my jaw tighten. I backed away and returned to the house, locking the door behind me. Inside, I felt stupid. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired. The house was new to me, and old places often have strange noises. I unpacked more boxes and tried to ignore the backyard. But before going to bed, I turned off the lights and stood near the back door, looking out. It was quiet. I didn't see any movement, but it might have been in my head. I went to bed and slept poorly, waking up a few times when I thought I heard distant rattling. The next morning I decided to check the cage again. It was bright outside. The yard was the same. The weeds looked thick and wet. The cage stood where it had always stood. I approached it looking for any clues. I tapped the bars again. Rust fell off. I grabbed one of the thicker bars and pulled. It didn't move. The door looked locked in place by its own bent shape. I leaned down and looked under the cage. The ground was uneven, with some roots curling up against the metal. There were no fresh marks, no broken branches, nothing that suggested anyone had been there. I listened. Nothing. I smelled the air. It smelled like damp earth, but no sweat or rust. That seemed odd. The smell had been strong at night. I tried to move on with my day. I set up my bedroom furniture and started to organize my desk. Around noon, I called a junk removal service. They said they could come next week. I said that was fine. I wanted that cage gone. The day passed quietly. Around sunset, I started to feel uneasy again. I kept thinking about the cage. I got a stronger flashlight and tested it inside the house. I made sure it was bright enough. I also grabbed a crowbar I found in the garage. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it, but I felt better having something in my hand. Later that evening, I decided to check the backyard again. The air was cool. The thin light I had installed outside buzzed softly. I moved slowly toward the cage, shining the beam of my flashlight ahead. This time, as I approached, I smelled that same odor. It was stronger. My eyes watered a bit, and I coughed once. The odor reminded me of old metal and stale sweat, like someone who hadn't washed in days. I held the crowbar in my left hand and the flashlight in my right. I shone the light at every angle. I reached the cage and circled around it. The bars cast long shadows on the ground. I saw no one. I leaned forward and poked one of the bars with the crowbar. It made a dull ringing sound. Then I heard the chains again. It sounded like they were inside the cage, but I couldn't see them. The sound was clear. Metal links rubbing and shaking. My hand holding the crowbar started to sweat. I tightened my grip. I stepped closer, almost pressing my face to the bars. My flashlight beam lit the inside. I saw dirt, leaves, and some old twigs. I spoke quietly. "Who's there?" But I could still hear the chains. Nothing else. No answer. I asked again, louder. "Who's there?" Nothing. The chain sound stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a low breathing again, like someone was straining. The odor got stronger. My eyes burned. I had to step back to catch my breath. I felt a knot in my stomach. Something was off. Maybe some animal was trapped in the ground beneath it. But that wouldn't explain the chains. I decided to try something else. I took a small rock from the ground and tossed it inside the cage through the bars. It hit the dirt and bounced once. I saw no reaction. I knelt down and reached in with the crowbar. I tapped the inside floor, just dirt. As I pulled the crowbar out, something jerked it. It wasn't strong, but I felt resistance, like someone grabbed it for a split second. I yanked it back. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I stumbled back a few steps and raised the flashlight. There was nothing inside. Empty. I knew what I felt, though. That wasn't my imagination. Something had pulled the crowbar. I backed away slowly, never turning my back. As I reached the door, I heard the chains again. Louder this time. They rattled for a few seconds, then stopped. I went inside and locked the door. I locked every door and window on the first floor. I turned on every light. My mouth felt dry, and I drank water. I tried to calm down. I considered calling the police. But what would I say? That I had a ghost in a cage? They'd think I was out of my mind. I decided to wait it out. If this was some kind of weird trick, I wanted to see what would happen next. If the cage was empty, maybe I was just tired, but I knew what I felt. Something had dwelled on the crowbar. Something invisible, and it was inside that cage. I spent the next day trying to ignore it. I sorted books, arranged furniture, and swept the floors. I looked out at the backyard occasionally. The cage never moved. By afternoon, I felt restless. I kept thinking about what I had felt. Around dusk, I brought a folding chair outside. I set it up about 10 feet from the cage. I brought a thermos of coffee, the flashlight, and a baseball bat. I sat there watching. The air grew cooler as the sun went down. The smells of evening came in, mostly damp leaves and distant traffic. For a while, nothing happened. Then, when the sky was dark, I saw the cage's bars tremble. It was slight, but I saw it. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it. As soon as the light hit the cage, I heard chains. I could see nothing inside, but I heard them. They rattled quickly, then slowed. I gripped the bat tightly. My knuckles felt stiff. My throat tightened. I thought about leaving, but I forced myself to stay. I wanted to see if it would show itself, whatever it was. I decided to try talking again. "I don't know what you are," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Can you understand me?" I waited, but there was no response. The chains rattled once more, then stopped. I tried again. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to know what you are." Silence. I shone the light inside the cage. There was nothing there, just empty space. Yet the air felt thicker again, and the odor returned. My eyes watered, and my nose burned. I took a step closer, keeping the bat ready. The smell got worse. It was like standing next to something old and sweaty. I coughed and stepped back, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. After a few minutes, I tried something else. I placed a small piece of food on a stick, just a bit of bread, and reached it into the cage. The bread rested on the dirt inside. I pulled the stick back and waited. The bread stayed there. I watched closely. After about a minute, I saw it move slightly, as if brushed aside. It rolled once and settled in the dirt. I saw no hand or paw. I saw nothing. I left the bread there and backed away. I waited longer, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I took the chair, the bat, and returned inside, locking the door. That night, I hardly slept. I dozed off after a while, but woke up to chain sounds around 3. They were faint, but I heard them. I stayed in bed, my heart pounding, until they stopped. In the morning, I went outside and checked the bread. It was still there, but crushed flat. Something had pressed it down. There was a faint indentation in the dirt, like a shape had rested there, but I couldn't tell what safe. I told myself that the junk removal guys would come next week and take this thing away. I tried to clear my mind, but would they be able to move it? It felt stuck in place. I spent the next few days in a routine. During the day, the cage was quiet. No smells, no sounds. At night, it would start, chains rattling, low breathing sounds, heavy air, strong odor. The flashlight always caused a reaction. Whenever I shone it inside, I heard the chains. When I kept the light off, I heard fewer sounds. Still, I didn't see anything, no shape, no figure. I tried tossing different objects inside the cage. Rocks, sticks, a rubber ball I found behind the garage. Sometimes they would remain untouched. Other times they would move slightly or end up crushed. The chain sounds never stopped, though. Every night they returned. I tried calling someone to check the backyard, but I felt stupid doing that. I ended up not doing it. I tried recording audio with my phone. I got some rattling sounds, but it just sounded like random metal noise. Nothing definitive. I considered camping in the yard all night, but I didn't have the guts to do it. The presence made my skin crawl. My arms would get goosebumps when I approached the cage after dark. I sweated more. My mouth got dry. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, the day came when the junk removal team arrived. It was late morning. 2 men showed up with a truck. They walked into the backyard, looked at the cage, and shrugged. They tried to lift it, but it wouldn't move. They tried to leverage it with metal bars, but it barely budged. They said it was stuck on something underground. They asked if I wanted them to dig around it. I said yes. They tried shovels, but they kept hitting thick roots. After a few hours of work, they gave up and said they'd need special equipment. They'd come back another day with stronger tools. I agreed and paid them for their time. As they left, I stood next to the cage and kicked one of the bars in frustration. Rust fell off. There were no sounds, no reaction. I felt relieved that there was no noise during the day. Maybe it only appeared at night. That evening, I waited inside. I kept the lights off and watched the yard from the window. Around midnight, I saw a slight movement in the shadows. I opened the door a crack and listened. Chains rattling. I smelled the odor again, faint, but there. I closed the door and locked it. I decided not to go out there anymore. If the removal team came back with heavy machinery, they could just rip it out of the ground. I wanted this done. I wanted it gone. I had no interest in solving the mystery. The presence never spoke, never showed itself. It just rattled chains and made me feel like I was choking on thick air. I slept on the couch, listening to distant rattling, until I drifted off. In the morning, I checked the yard again. Quiet, calm, empty. The cage sat there, a rusted hulk, bent and useless. I didn't know what to think. I had no explanation. The presence was real to me. It pulled at tools, crushed bread, rattled chains, and filled the air with foul smells. But I never saw it. I never understood what it wanted. The only thing I knew was that it reacted to the flashlight at night and never came out during the day. I made up my mind. I would wait until the junk guys came back and tore it out. I would not go out there again at night. I would not listen to those chains or smell that sweat and rust. I would stay inside. Door locked. Windows closed. Lights on. I would pretend it wasn't there. I wanted to live a normal life in my new home. If that meant ignoring the strange invisible occupant of that cage until it was gone, so be it. I waited. I never found out what it was. I only know that at night, when the air was still, I could hear it breathing, rattling chains, and shifting inside that old metal cage in my backyard. And I never went back out there again in the dark. I remember standing near the window with my face almost pressed against the cold glass. There was no power in the cabin. I had tried the light switch several times out of habit, but nothing had changed since I first arrived. The sky outside was full of stars. They covered every corner of the darkness, and they looked brighter here in the mountains than anywhere else I'd ever been. But that night, I noticed something off about them. They were flickering in a strange sequence. It wasn't just a natural twinkle. The pattern reminded me of some kind of coded signal, like short and long flashes. It made me feel uneasy, because it didn't look random. It felt intentional. I was alone in that one-room cabin. There was a simple bed, a wooden table, and a single chair. The door was shut and locked from the inside, and the windows were closed except for the one I stood by. The cabin's walls were rough, and I could still smell old wood and dust. The air was cold. I wore a thick jacket and a knitted hat. In my pocket I had a flashlight, but I tried not to use it much, because I wasn't sure how long the batteries would last. There was no wind, no distant animals, no creaking trees. Outside the night was completely silent. The stars kept flashing. Just that quiet stillness that made my ears ring. I tried to see if there was a pattern I could understand. I watched it blink. A short flash, a longer flash, a pause, 2 short flashes. My eyes strained as I tracked this pattern. One bright star near the top of the window's frame caught my attention. It felt like something was trying to communicate, and I didn't know what it wanted. My heart was beating faster than normal. I wasn't sure why. I stepped away from the window and moved to the center of the room. My boots made a dull thud on the wooden floor. I rubbed my hands together to keep them warm. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I realized I was holding my breath. I tried not to think too hard about it, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't completely alone. I let it out slowly. I looked around the room. Everything seemed normal at first glance. The table was bare. My backpack rested on the chair, and the bed was unmade with a thick blanket piled at the foot. But then I felt a slight movement of the air near the door. It was subtle, like a small draft. I turned my head quickly, shining my flashlight toward that corner. Saw nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The air felt heavier on that side of the room. I turned the flashlight off to save power. I stood still and listened. My breathing sounded too loud, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The darkness inside the cabin was deep. The only light came from the stars through the window. I tried to see with my peripheral vision. Sometimes that helps in low light. Then I heard a faint scraping sound on the floor behind me. It was so soft I thought I might have imagined it, but I heard it again. Something was sliding across the floor slowly, without any clear pattern. I didn't hear footsteps or anything heavy, just a gentle shift, like fabric against wood. My chest tightened. I took a step backward, closer to the window. and the glass felt cold against my shoulder. I ran my tongue over my dry lips. My palms were sweating inside my gloves. I raised my flashlight slowly, aiming it toward the opposite corner of the room, then pressed the button. The beam was weak but enough to see the floor and the bottom parts of the wall. For a moment I saw nothing. Then I noticed a shape near the floor, low and dark, looking like a mass of something smooth and featureless. It moved again, sliding an inch or two, then stopping. I could hear it now, that soft sliding sound. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt tight. I lowered the flashlight and turned it off again. The idea of shining light on it felt risky. I didn't know if it would react. My mind raced. I didn't know what it was, how it got inside, or what it wanted. I wondered if it could see me in the dark. I wondered if it knew I was there from the start. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stay on my feet. I breathed through my nose, slow and quiet. I tried to think clearly. The stars were still flickering outside. I turned my head slightly and looked at them through the corner of my eye. They kept up their strange blinking. I felt as if they were answering questions I hadn't spoken out loud. I tried to think something simple. What do you want? I focused that thought in my head and stared at the stars. Right after that, I noticed the pattern changed. The star I had been watching near the window blinked quickly 3 times, paused, then blinked once more. I had no idea what that meant, but it felt like a response. My chest tightened again. I thought something else. Are you here with me? I tried to project the question in my mind, focusing on the presence in the room and the stars outside. The same star blinked twice, paused, then blinked twice again. I swallowed hard. It didn't reassure me. It just confirmed that something understood me. I felt my legs start to shake. I leaned against the window frame for support. My back brushed against the cold glass. I could see my own breath now. I wondered if the temperature had dropped, or if it was just my nerves. The shape on the floor still made no sound except for that faint sliding noise. It hadn't come closer. It stayed near the corner as if waiting. I decided to try something else. I raised my left hand slowly and reached for my backpack, keeping my eyes on the dark shape while my fingers searched the chair. I grabbed the backpack strap and pulled it closer. My movements were slow and careful. I managed to unzip a side pocket and found a small notepad and pen inside. I took them out. I pressed the pen tip against the paper and waited. My plan was to try writing down the blinking patterns of the stars. Maybe I could decode them, but my hand was shaking so much that I could barely write a straight line. I turned slightly and looked back at the window. The stars were bright and steady, except for the blinking ones I focused on. I watched a sequence and tried to write down something like dots and dashes, but without a reference, it was almost impossible. I ended up scribbling nonsense. My throat felt dry. I slid the notepad back into my backpack. The silence inside the cabin weighed heavily on me. I tried to think of what to do next. I considered speaking out loud, but my voice might draw the thing closer. I thought about leaving the cabin, but what if there was something outside? I hadn't heard anything outside, and the dark shape had appeared inside, not from the door. Leaving felt risky. I decided to stay still and wait for a hint. I brought my flashlight up again and pressed the button halfway, letting a dim glow hit the floor. The shape hadn't moved closer. It remained where it was. I tried to make out details. It was hard to describe. It looked smooth, with no limbs or features. It was just a dark presence about the size of a small chair, but without a clear outline. It was as if it absorbed the light. I let go of the flashlight's button and let the darkness return. I felt safer that way. Suddenly, I felt pressure in my head like a mild headache. It wasn't painful, just a dull sensation behind my eyes. I blinked a few times. I noticed the stars outside blinking rapidly, as if agitated. I didn't know if they caused the pressure or if it was just stress. I focused again. "What are you?" I asked in my head. The stars blinked in a rapid, confusing sequence. I couldn't read it. I tried again. "Do you understand me?" This time the stars blinked slowly. One long flash, one short flash, then silence. I took that as a yes, even though I couldn't be sure. I ran my fingers along the window frame. The paint was rough. My muscles felt tense, and my shoulders ached. I glanced at the door. It was still shut. I thought about making a run for it. If I could open the door and get outside, maybe I could put some distance between me and this thing. But would I see better out there? Would I be able to understand what was happening? The night outside was vast and empty. The cabin at least provided 4 walls and a sense of containment. The dark shape moved again. This time I saw it glide a few inches toward the center of the floor, then stop. I heard no scraping sound this time. It was quiet. I pressed myself harder against the wall, tightening my jaw. My heart thumped. I looked at my boots and curled my toes inside them. Then I raised my eyes again. It was still there. I decided to try making a sound, just a small noise to see if it reacted. I cleared my throat softly. The shape made no sudden move. The stars didn't change their pattern. I waited a few seconds, then took a single step away from the window, moving slowly along the wall toward the door. My foot creaked on the floor. The shape shifted an inch toward me. I stopped moving. My breath caught in my throat. I felt sweat running down my back. I tried thinking at it again. I'm leaving. I don't want trouble. The stars flashed 3 times quickly. I couldn't tell if they approved or warned me. The shape didn't lunge, but it clearly reacted to my movements. I wondered if it was curious or if it was controlling me somehow. I stayed still and waited. Seconds dragged. My legs hurt from standing so rigid. I risked another step toward the door. The shape moved again, sliding in a slow arc, blocking my path by positioning itself between me and the door. I felt trapped. My breathing grew shallow. I tightened my fists. I looked back at the window. The stars seemed calmer now, blinking at a slower pace. I swallowed and decided to try a different tactic. I thought, what do you want me to do? I aimed this question at both the shape and the stars. The star I'd been watching flashed in a pattern I hadn't seen before. Short, short, long, pause, short. I stared at it, confused. The shape moved slightly away from the door, leaving a small gap. I waited to see if it would open a path. I moved my foot half an inch. No reaction. I moved another inch. Still no reaction. I took a step forward, moving slowly, watching the shape. It didn't block me this time. I reached the door. My hand hovered over the handle. I didn't turn it yet. I looked at the shape. It stayed where it was, near the center of the room, not sliding closer. I moved my other hand toward my jacket pocket and slowly pulled out my flashlight again. I clicked it on and aimed the weak beam at the shape, careful not to startle it. Its surface looked dull and dark, without reflections. I couldn't identify any features. It was just there, a silent mass. I turned my head toward the window and saw the stars again. They blinked slowly, evenly. I felt like they were waiting for something. Maybe they had shown me what I needed to see. Maybe the shape was just a messenger, or a test. I had no clue. I just knew that whatever this was, it understood me more than I understood it. I felt a chill run down my spine. With my free hand, I touched the door handle. It felt cold and solid. I turned it slowly. The latch clicked quietly. I pulled the door open a few inches. Outside, the night air was even colder. I smelled wet leaves and damp earth. No wind, no sound. I wondered if the shape would follow me outside. I turned back to look at it. It didn't move. It stayed where it was, silent, watching, or maybe just existing. I lowered my flashlight and stepped through the door frame. I was careful not to slam the door, and I pulled it closed behind me. I stood on the small porch of the cabin, breathing the cold night air, looking at the stars without the filter of glass. They blinked a few more times, then settled into a steady shine, like normal stars. I stepped off the porch and moved a few feet away. The ground was uneven under my boots. I turned around. I could see the cabin outline, the closed door, and the window. Behind that window, something was inside, something that slid on the floor without noise and responded to my thoughts through the stars. It hadn't attacked me or hurt me. It had just shown me that it was there, that it understood. I waited a full minute watching the cabin. Nothing happened. No lights, no movement, just darkness. I looked up at the stars again. They were normal now, just bright points of light in the sky. I felt a bit of relief. I still couldn't relax completely, but at least I was outside. I decided to walk a short distance away to the edge of the small clearing where the cabin stood. My breath made faint clouds in front of me. I took out my flashlight and checked the battery level by the dim glow on the side. It was low. I didn't know what time it was, but I guessed it was the early hours of the morning. I felt tired and wired at the same time. I stood there for a long while, trying to calm down. My body felt sore from tension. My legs felt heavy. My shoulders ached. I realized I was hungry, but the thought of going back inside made my stomach twist. I kept looking at the cabin. Part of me wanted to open the door again and see if the shape was still there. Another part of me wanted to leave immediately, walk down the mountain path until I reached my truck and get the hell away. But I remembered the weird communication through the stars. I remembered how it reacted to my thoughts. I decided to wait until dawn. Maybe daylight would make things clearer. Maybe the shape would be gone by morning, and I could retrieve my things safely. Until then, I would stay outside, keep my flashlight off, and watch the cabin from a distance. I had no idea if it could slip under doors or through walls. I kept a safe gap between me and the structure. Time passed slowly. The night stayed quiet. I didn't see the shape again. The stars remained calm, no longer blinking in strange patterns. I felt my breathing return to normal, but my heart still beat a little too fast. I stood there, hands in my pockets, jaw clenched, waiting for any sign of change. All I knew was that something had been inside with me, and had understood what I was thinking. That knowledge alone kept my body tense and my mind on edge. I waited for dawn, and nothing else happened that night. I remember the day I stepped into the old abandoned hospital. I had come to look at the architecture for a research project. I expected to see long, empty halls, chipped paint, and maybe some old furniture. I did not expect to feel a presence in the corridor. I did not expect to feel something grip the edge of my shirt when no one was there. I did not expect the whispers that told me to come, even though I could see no person. Yet, that is what happened. I will tell exactly what I saw and what I felt. I will describe the sounds and the smells. I will not add extra interpretations. I will not try to guess the meaning behind what I experienced. I will just say what was there and how I reacted. I had arrived at the hospital in the early afternoon. The building stood at the end of a cracked asphalt road with no fence. The front door was a wide glass entrance covered with dirt and old leaves. The building looked large and empty. The windows on the upper floors were all dark. The parking lot had weeds pushing through the pavement. The sun was bright outside, but the lobby inside was dim because the power was off. Some light came through the glass front door, but the corners of the lobby were dark. I wore jeans, a long-sleeved shirt and a pair of boots. I carried a small flashlight and a notebook. I was there to examine the layout of the corridors, the construction style of the rooms, and any original design details that remained. I planned to write down my observations and take a few photographs with my phone. I remember the smell of dust and old paint as soon as I stepped inside. My own footsteps echoed on the tiled floor. The ceiling had stains. The reception desk stood on the left side. The wood was warped, and there was a pile of old papers scattered across it. I did not touch them. I just looked around and noted the design of the lobby. A wide space, a few plastic chairs along the walls, and a doorway leading deeper into the hospital. I decided to head into the main corridor. I walked through the doorway and found a long hall. The walls were white with stains. Some parts of the paint had peeled off, showing gray concrete underneath. The floor tiles were mostly intact but dirty. There were old metal doors on both sides of the hall. Some were open and some were closed. The open one showed small rooms with beds and tables. The beds had thin, dusty mattresses. Some had abandoned sheets that looked stained and stiff. As I moved forward, I felt uneasy. I kept looking behind me, but I saw nothing unusual. My flashlight beam shook slightly because my hand was not steady. I tried to focus on my task. I looked at the ceiling. There were old fluorescent lights with no power. Some wiring hung loose. I took a few photos of the hall. My phone camera clicked softly. Halfway down the corridor, I heard a quiet sound. It was a whisper. I stopped walking and held my breath. The whisper came from somewhere to my right. I turned my head and aimed the flashlight. The door there was closed. I didn't see any movement. I waited a few seconds. I heard nothing else. I took a step closer to the door. It was a metal door with rust around the edges. The handle was also rusty. The door didn't look locked, but I didn't open it then. I just stood there. My chest felt tight. I remember thinking that maybe I imagined the whisper. I forced myself to keep moving. I walked further down the corridor. I passed a few more doors. Some were open. Inside one room, I saw an old wheelchair in the corner. The leather seat was cracked. There was a small table with a lamp on it. I saw no personal items, no papers, no medicine bottles. Another room had a bed frame without a mattress. The frame was metal and looked bent. I stepped into that room to get a closer look. I tapped the frame gently with my knuckle. It made a dull sound. I wrote a note about the condition of the furniture. As I stepped back into the corridor, I felt something tug at my shirt. It was a very light pull. I spun around fast and shone my flashlight behind me. There was nothing there, only the empty corridor. My shirt still felt as if someone had just pinched the cloth and pulled it. I touched the fabric, it was loose. I looked at the floor. It was just dirty tile. My heartbeat was fast, so I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed, but I got no reply. I felt sweat on my forehead. My stomach tightened. I was nervous. This wasn't normal. There was no breeze in the corridor. Nothing that should have moved my shirt. I held the flashlight tighter and decided to keep going. I wanted to finish my examination and leave. I told myself I would just quickly check a few more rooms and then exit. I didn't want to run out immediately, but I also didn't want to stay long. A bit further down, I reached a larger door at the end of the corridor. It was wide, probably leading to a ward or surgery area. The door was partly open. I squeezed through and found myself in a larger space with several beds arranged in rows. This must have been some kind of patient ward. The windows on the left side were all covered with grime. A few small shafts of light came through enough to see without the flashlight. The beds had old sheets and blankets on them. Some looked clean, but most looked dusty and crumpled. I noticed something strange. The sheets on the bed closest to me looked as if someone had just pulled them back. They weren't flat and even like the others. They were bunched up near the foot of the bed. I didn't remember touching them. I walked over and leaned forward. I could smell old fabric and stale air. I touched the sheet. It felt soft, not stiff like the others. It was strange. The bed frame was metal, with peeling paint. There were no personal items on the bed. No pillow, no tags. Just the sheet and a blanket. I moved the sheet a little to see if anything was under it. There was nothing. As I stood there, I heard another whisper. This time it was clearer. It sounded like a single word. Come. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. I turned around quickly. I saw no one. The ward was empty. I tried to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to come from somewhere near the entrance I had just used. I took a step in that direction. I heard no footsteps, no breathing other than my own. I said, "Who's there?" My voice was shaky. I waited. No answer. I felt cold sweat on my back. My shoulders were tense. I wanted to leave the ward. I wanted to walk back the way I came and head out of the building. But I also wanted to know what was causing these whispers and these strange touches. I walked slowly toward the door. I kept my flashlight aimed ahead. As I reached the door, I heard a soft scrape behind me. I turned. One of the beds far at the end of the ward seemed to have shifted slightly. It was a faint movement, like something had bumped it. I walked closer to check. The legs of the bed were rusty and uneven. Perhaps the floor was not level. I pressed down on the foot of the bed. It wobbled a bit. I convinced myself it might have settled under its own weight. I felt a tightness in my throat. My mouth was dry. I turned and left the ward. I stepped back into the corridor. I decided to return to the lobby and leave. My research could wait. I had some notes and a few photographs. That was enough for now. I headed back the way I came, shining the flashlight at the doors along the hall. Everything looked the same as before. When I reached the halfway point, I stopped. The door where I had first heard the whisper was now open. It had been closed when I passed earlier. Now it stood open a few inches, and the gap was narrow enough that I could see into the room. It looked like an examination room with a single bed, a metal cabinet, and a stool. My hands felt shaky, but I walked closer to see if someone was inside. I stepped up to the door and pushed it open with my foot. The hinges squeaked. The room smelled musty, and the bed was bare. No sheets, just a mattress with stains. The cabinet doors were slightly ajar, so I shone the flashlight inside. It was empty except for some dust. The stool was metal with a torn cushion on top. I listened carefully. The room was silent. I waved my hand through the air, trying to see if something was dangling from the ceiling. Maybe a loose wire that could have tugged my shirt. There was nothing. The ceiling was cracked, but bare. I noticed the faint sound again. Come. It was closer now, as if spoken right in my ear. I jumped and turned around, but there was no one there. I could feel my heart pounding, and my chest felt tight. I left the room and pulled the door closed behind me. The handle felt cold and rough. Then I hurried down the corridor. I didn't run, but my steps were quick and uneven. I wanted to reach the lobby and get out of the building. As I approached the lobby area, I could see the light from the front door. It was still early enough outside that the sunlight filtered in. The contrast felt comforting. The corridor behind me was darker. I glanced over my shoulder. I saw nothing following me. I stepped into the lobby. The chairs were still there, and the reception desk still had scattered papers. I felt relief at seeing the exit. I walked straight toward the glass door. As I reached for the handle of the door, I felt a firm grip on my shoulder. It felt like a hand, but there was no one there. I spun around, nothing. The air felt stale. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I gripped the door handle, pulled, and stepped outside. The sound of my boots on the cracked asphalt felt reassuring. I turned to look at the building. Through the glass, the lobby was empty. No signs of movement. The parking lot was quiet. The sunlight felt warm on my face. I stood there for a minute, breathing heavily. I walked to my car. It was parked a short distance away. I pulled open the driver's door and sat inside. I took a few moments to calm myself. My clothes felt damp with sweat. My hands were shaking. I checked my phone. The photos were there. A few shots of the corridor, the ward, the empty rooms. Nothing looked unusual in the images. Just old hospital interiors. Before I left, I looked at the building again. The windows were dark. The entrance was still open. I did not see anyone. I heard no whispers outside. There was just the quiet afternoon air. I started the car and drove away. The road was empty. My shoulders still felt tense. My mind replayed the touches, the whispers, and the tug on my shirt. I could still feel the sensation of that invisible hand on my shoulder. I arrived home later and backed up the photos onto my computer. I scanned them carefully, trying to find any sign of a person or something out of place. I saw only old rooms, dusty beds, and chipped paint. There was nothing that explained the voice or the feeling of someone pulling my shirt. I considered going back another day. I didn't like how I left things. I didn't finish my research. I wanted to confirm the building's layout and note more details, but the idea of returning made my stomach turn. I didn't know how to prepare for what I couldn't see. The whispers had sounded human, but there was no one there. The touch had felt like a hand, but I saw no hand. The doors had moved. The sheets had shifted. Something seemed to be trying to guide me deeper inside, trying to get me to follow. But follow what? I stayed home that night. I sat in my living room with the lights on and the windows closed. I tried to focus on my notes. The hospital was built decades ago. The main corridor was long and straightforward. The ward had about a dozen beds. The examination rooms were small and plain. I had all the facts, but facts did not help me understand the things I felt. I decided not to return. The risk was not worth it. I told myself that I had enough information. In the days that followed, I tried to forget the experience. I went on with my normal tasks. I did other research, visited other buildings, but I never forgot the feeling of those invisible fingers on my shirt or the whispers telling me to come. I never forgot that I stood face to face with an empty corridor and still felt a presence as clear as any person. I do not have an explanation. I will just say what happened. I walked into an abandoned hospital. I felt things that made no sense. I left without answers. That is all. I turned on the overhead light in my bedroom. My eyes felt dry, so I rubbed them with my knuckles. I stood in the middle of the room near my bed. The sheets were messy, and the pillows were crooked. The wooden nightstand was in its usual place, and my phone charger cable hung off the edge. Everything looked normal except for one thing. On the wall opposite my bed, next to the window, I saw a shadow. It looked like a shape projected by a human figure, but it was shorter than me and thinner. It did not line up with any furniture. I stared at it. I stepped to the left. I checked the position of the lamp, and I moved my own arms. My shadow appeared normally on the floor, faint and predictable. But the shape on the wall did not match my body. It stayed in place, unchanging even when I adjusted my angle. A small tension built in my chest, which I tried to alleviate by tightening my jaw. There was nothing in the room that could have created that outline. I examined the corner of the desk, the shape of the chair, the frame of the door, and the uneven plaster on the walls. Nothing matched it. I turned off the overhead light, then turned it back on again. The strange shadow remained. I walked closer to it. As I drew nearer, I realized that it had a vague human form, a torso and a head, but no distinct features or arms or legs. It simply tapered at the top and widened slightly in the middle. A slight stiffness developed in my shoulders. My breathing slowed, and I held my breath. I lifted my phone and aimed its flashlight at the wall. I moved the beam around. When the light from the phone's flashlight swept across that shape, it flickered, expanded slightly, and then pulled back. It looked like it was breathing. I did not understand how that was possible. There was no object there. The wall was white and flat, with a smooth texture. As I moved the flashlight side to side, the shadow shifted. Unlike a normal shadow, it did not remain still. Instead, it seemed to twitch and adjust its size as if reacting to my movements. My stomach tightened. I swallowed hard and took a step back. I turned off my phone's flashlight and stood quietly. I tried to calm my mind by focusing on simple details. The slight smell of dust in the room, the quiet hum from outside traffic, and the faint ticking of my watch on the nightstand. I turned off the overhead light. I stood in the darkness. After a few seconds, I turned the light back on. The shape was still there. I walked up to the wall and reached out. My hand touched only the cool surface of the paint. Nothing else. I ran my palm over it. It felt smooth. No bump, no stain. The shadow itself did not move when my hand covered that area. My hand's shadow overlapped with the strange shape, but it did not block it. The strange shape remained visible, as if it were on top of everything else. I took a deep breath. My heart beat a little faster. I rubbed my arms. I didn't feel warm. If anything, I felt a slight chill despite the room's normal temperature. I checked every light source in my bedroom. The overhead light was in the center of the ceiling. The lamp on my desk was off, and the hallway light was off. The curtains were drawn, and no strong light came from outside. There was nothing that made sense about this shape. I tried adjusting my bed's position. I dragged it a bit to the side and checked if maybe the wooden headboard or some object hidden behind the bed frame could create a strange shadow. I found nothing. The shape on the wall did not depend on the bed's position. I felt sweat forming under my armpits. I dried my forehead with the back of my hand. I looked at the time on my phone. It was late, close to midnight. I decided to ignore it for now. I got into bed, turned off the light, and tried to sleep. I lay on my side facing away from that wall. I kept my eyes closed. I tried not to think about it. I listened to my own breathing. After several minutes, I opened my eyes and glanced towards the wall. The room was dark, but a faint glow from outside streetlights came through the curtains. In that faint light, I still saw the outline. It was not as sharp, but it was there. I tightened my grip on the sheets. I decided to sleep with the lights on. I turned the overhead light back on. I tried reading something on my phone, just to distract myself. After a while, I put the phone down. I felt my eyes closing. I managed to doze off for a bit. I woke up suddenly when I felt a strange sensation on my shoulder. It felt like a fingertip made of ice. I jerked my body and sat up. The room was bright. The overhead light was still on. I looked around. No one was there. My bedroom door was closed. I heard nothing but a distant car horn outside. I rubbed my shoulder. My skin was a bit cold there. I didn't see any mark. I turned to the wall. The shadow was still there. It had not moved, but I felt like it was waiting. I got out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and aimed it at the wall again. The shadow flickered and then stretched, becoming taller and thinner for a second. I pulled the flashlight away. Then, I checked behind me. The furniture was all normal. The closet door was closed. The drawers were closed. The chair was in the corner, empty. Nothing could cause this. I considered leaving the room and sleeping in the living room. I walked out with my pillow wrapped in a blanket. I sat on the couch. I tried to relax by staring at the dark TV screen. I closed my eyes. After some time, I felt calm enough to try sleeping there. I managed to sleep for a few hours. In the morning, I went back to my bedroom. I stood in front of the wall. The shadow was gone in daylight. The room looked normal. I tapped the wall with my knuckles. It sounded hollow in some spots, solid in others. Nothing strange. I spent the day doing normal tasks. Worked at my desk, ate my meals, and came in and out of the room a few times. In the afternoon, I checked the wall again with the lights on. Nothing was unusual. I tried different angles. Still nothing. At night, after dinner, I returned to my bedroom. I turned on the overhead light. After a few seconds, I saw it again. That same shape appeared on the wall. I felt my throat tighten. I tried to capture it on my phone's camera. I held my phone up and took a picture. The photo showed my wall, but the shape was not there in the image. I tried recording a video. Same result. The shadow did not appear on camera. I moved the flashlight beam again. The shadow twitched. It reacted. I turned off the flashlight. I approached the wall. I stepped until I was only a few inches away. I could feel my own heartbeat. I smelled my own sweat. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I lifted my hand and hovered it over the area where the shadow was. My hand's shadow fell on the wall, but it did not blend with the strange shape. The strange shape seemed to float on top. It had no texture, just darkness. I pressed my palm against the wall. The paint felt a bit cooler than the rest of the room. I stepped back and turned off the overhead light. In the darkness, I felt uncomfortable. I thought I could sense movement. I tried to ignore it and turn the light back on. The shape was there, unchanged. I looked at my reflection in the mirror on the closet door. I saw my face tired with dark circles under my eyes. I looked at the wall again. The shape was not my imagination. It was present. I sat on the bed, facing the wall. I tried speaking in a low voice and asked if anyone was there. No answer. I waited. Nothing happened. I kept my eyes on the shape. After several minutes, it shifted slightly. It became a bit wider, then returned to its original form. I felt a strong chill run down my arms. I wanted to leave the room again, but I also wanted to understand this. I stood up and walked around, shining the flashlight in different spots. Each time the flashlight beam swept over it, the shadow seemed to expand and then pull back as if disturbed by the light. Without the flashlight, with only the overhead light, it remained still. I tried turning the overhead light off and on multiple times quickly. The shape never disappeared while the light was on. When I turned it off, I couldn't see it clearly, but I sensed it was still there. I knew I needed to sleep eventually, but the memory of that cold touch on my shoulder would not leave my mind. I checked the room's temperature. It was normal. I checked the window. It was closed and no drafts were present. Eventually, I felt too tired to stand around. I lay on the bed with the lights on again. I kept my eyes open. My legs felt tight, and my arms felt heavy. I looked at the shape, trying not to think about what it could be. I just knew it didn't belong there. It had no source, and it wasn't a trick of the mind. It felt real, like an uninvited guest. After a long time of staring, I fell asleep. I woke up in the early hours. My eyes were half open, and I felt a presence near me. Before I could focus, I felt that cold touch on my shoulder again, this time firmer. I jumped up and switched on my phone's flashlight, aiming it in all directions. Nothing. No one was in the room with me. The overhead light was already on, and the door was locked. The windows were closed. I felt my heart pounding, my breathing fast. I gripped my phone tight. My hand was shaking. I looked at the wall. The shape looked the same, but for a moment I thought I saw it ripple slightly. I got out of bed and stepped closer to the wall again. I touched my shoulder. My skin was warm now, but I remembered how cold it felt. I moved my hand toward the wall, holding the flashlight beam steady. The shape reacted, twitching and then contracting. I pulled the flashlight away. I decided not to provoke it. I had no idea what I was dealing with. A heavy pressure settled in my stomach, and my knees felt weak. I sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the opposite wall, watching that shape. Time passed slowly. I heard a siren outside, and the building creaked. My clock on the nightstand showed almost 4 in the morning. The shape did not leave. I considered leaving the apartment altogether, but I had nowhere else to go at that hour. I also considered turning off all the lights and trying to ignore it, but I knew that wouldn't help. I tried to rationalize what I saw, but nothing made sense. I stood up and opened the closet door, checking behind clothes and boxes. I found nothing unusual. I went to the desk, turned on the small lamp, and turned off the overhead light. In the desk lamp's warm light, the shape on the wall was weaker, but still visible. It did not match any object. I shined the flashlight again. Same reaction. I turned the overhead light back on and left the lamp off. The shape returned to its clearer form. I decided to spend the rest of the night awake, observing. Every so often my eyes got heavy, and I jerked my head up to avoid sleeping. I rubbed my face. My skin felt clammy. I was sweating under my shirt. My legs were stiff, and my throat felt dry. I got up to drink some water from the kitchen. I stepped out of the bedroom, closing the door behind me, and walked to the kitchen sink. I drank cold water straight from a glass. I tried to steady my breathing. A few minutes later, I returned to the bedroom. The shape was still there, unchanged. It did not depend on my presence. It remained as if anchored to that spot. I approached it again. This time, holding a small hand mirror, I tilted the mirror to see if the shape would appear differently. In the mirror's reflection, I saw the wall, but the shape appeared faint. It was more visible to my direct eyes than in the reflection. I found that odd. I tried covering the overhead light bulb with my hand, creating different angles of light. Nothing explained the shape. I thought about painting over that area. I opened a drawer and took out a piece of tape. I placed a long strip of tape over the wall where the shape was. The shape showed through the tape as if the tape were transparent. I peeled the tape off. I pressed my fingernail into the paint. The paint chipped slightly. Beneath it was just plaster. The shape remained. I sat back down on the bed, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. My head felt heavy. I felt my heart beating faster again as I remembered that cold sensation on my shoulder. The shape had touched me. It had some kind of presence, but it did not speak or move like a person. It never made a sound. It just existed there, reacting to my flashlight, refusing to disappear. The night dragged on. I tried to sleep again, turning off the overhead light and leaving the desk lamp on. The shape was still there, faint but present. I rolled onto my side, facing the opposite direction. I closed my eyes. My arms were tense. I tried to relax my muscles, letting them rest against the mattress. After a while, I drifted off. I woke up when the first hints of daylight entered through the curtains. I opened my eyes. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the wall. With daylight, I saw nothing strange. The shape was gone. The room was normal. I stood up, my legs wobbling slightly. I checked my phone. It was morning. I looked closely at the wall, then checked every inch of furniture. Nothing gave me any clue. I knew that when night came, the shape would return. It had come 2 nights in a row. It touched me twice. I had no reason to believe it would leave on its own. I spent that entire day feeling a knot in my stomach. I felt tired and anxious. I tried to keep busy. I organized my desk drawers, vacuumed the floor, took a shower, stepped out of the apartment for a short walk around the block, and came back and made dinner. All day, I avoided turning on bright lights in the bedroom. I kept the room lit softly. In that soft light, I did not see the shape, but I knew it would appear again if I turned on the overhead light at night. After dinner, I stood at the doorway of the bedroom and reached for the switch. I hesitated. Then I flicked the switch. The overhead light lit up. After a few seconds, I saw it again, exactly in the same spot. I backed out of the room and closed the door. The shape was a visitor that refused to leave. It was silent and calm. It did not vanish no matter what I did, and I had to live with it, waiting and watching. I boarded the train a few minutes before midnight, carrying a small duffel bag and a plastic bottle of water. The platform was almost empty. The ticket agent had barely looked up as I passed through. I stepped onto the last car, found a row of seats near the back, and dropped my bag on the floor. The overhead lights flickered slightly as I sat down. The air smelled like old fabric and dust. The fabric on the seats was worn and rough under my palms. The windows were streaked with grime, and the corridor at the far end of the car seemed dim and narrow. There was no one else in this car. I looked around twice to confirm it. Nothing but empty seats and silence, except for the low hum of the train's engine and the gentle rattling of the wheels. I tried to settle in. I leaned back and listened to the quiet clicking sounds coming from the tracks underneath. I was tired, but I didn't feel like sleeping yet. The train moved slowly out of the station, and the darkness outside pressed against the windows. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I didn't expect any night trains often had poor reception. I slipped my phone back into my jacket pocket and took a sip of water. The car's lights were weak and yellowish. A single overhead bulb near my seat made everything look slightly pale. After a few minutes, the train picked up speed. The ride was steady and smooth, with just a slight sway. The seats around me remained empty. No conductor passed by, and no announcement came over the speakers. I rubbed my face, feeling a slight roughness on my chin. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking I might rest. But after a few seconds, a sensation crept over me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes and looked around again. Empty seats. No movement. No sound except the train's rhythm. I took another sip of water and swallowed hard. I noticed the dryness in my throat. I shifted in my seat and tried to ignore it. We passed through a short tunnel. The interior of the car dimmed as the outside lights disappeared for a few seconds. I held my breath without meaning to. When we emerged, I exhaled and glanced to my left. There was an empty seat right next to mine, facing forward. I had chosen a window seat and I could see my reflection in the glass. I saw my tired eyes, the shape of my jacket collar, and then, to my confusion, I saw something else. A dark silhouette next to me. In the reflection, it looked like a person sitting right there. I turned my head to check, but the seat was empty. I froze, staring at the cushion. It had a slight indentation, as if someone had sat there earlier, but I couldn't say for sure. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. My eyes might have been playing tricks on me. I leaned forward and pressed my forehead against the window. The cool glass felt good. I looked again. In the reflection, that shape was still there. It looked like a human figure sitting upright, facing forward as if relaxed. The details were hard to make out, just a faint outline of shoulders and a head, but it was definitely there in the reflection. I held my breath again. I felt sweat forming at the base of my neck. I turned quickly to my left. No one, just an empty seat. I gripped the armrest. My heart was beating fast. I tried to breathe slowly. My mouth was dry. I forced myself to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe a reflection of something outside. Maybe the shape was formed by dirt on the glass and the dim interior light. I kept looking at the window, then back at the seat. Every time I looked at the reflection, I saw that shape. Every time I looked directly at the seat, it was empty. I reached over and touched the seat next to me. I ran my hand over the fabric. Nothing unusual, just the old upholstery. My hand was slightly shaky. I pulled it back and rested it on my thigh. I heard a soft whisper. It was so quiet, I barely caught it. It came from my left side. It sounded like a single breath of air passing near my ear. I jerked my head toward the sound. There was nothing. I could see the door at the far end of the car still closed. The lights hummed faintly. My chest felt tight. I tried to stay calm, clenching my jaw. I looked up and down the aisle. No one else was here. The train rattled slightly, and the sound of metal wheels on tracks continued at a steady rhythm. Time passed slowly. I checked my watch, and only a few minutes had gone by since I first saw that shape. I felt trapped. I considered moving to another seat or car, but wasn't sure if that would help. I decided to stand up. I rose carefully, trying not to feel stupid about my sudden caution. They walked down the aisle. The seats were all empty. Each row looked the same, worn and stained. I reached the door at the end and tried to open it. The latch was stuck. I pressed harder. Still stuck. I pulled back, took a breath, and tried again. It wouldn't budge. I tried the opposite direction. Nothing. I didn't want to break the door handle. I muttered a quiet curse and turned around. As I faced the length of the car, I saw my seat at the far end. I noticed that the overhead light above that seat flickered slightly. I watched it for a few seconds, hoping it would stop. It kept flickering. A faint buzzing sound reached my ears. I walked back slowly. My shoes made a dull thump on the thin carpet. I sat down in my seat again. I looked outside. The countryside was dark. The occasional lights of distant houses passed by, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I glanced at the window's reflection. The silhouette was still there, sitting next to me. I pressed my lips together and tried to focus on something else. I checked my phone again, no signal. I considered turning on some music, but I didn't feel comfortable putting on headphones. I wanted to hear everything around me. I placed the phone back in my jacket pocket. I placed my hand on my knee and tapped it nervously. My stomach felt uneasy. My breathing was shallow. I stared at the seat next to me. It remained empty. The whispering came again, this time sounding like my name, but I wasn't sure. It was too soft and quick. I leaned away, pressing my shoulder against the window. I couldn't see anything in the aisle except empty rows of seats. I felt the urge to say something. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Hello." I waited. No answer. Just the steady hum of the train and the occasional creak of the old frame. I swallowed, feeling my throat ache. I started to notice small details, the faint smell of mildew, The way the seat springs underneath me felt uneven, the slight draft coming from the corner of the window frame. I rubbed my hands together to warm them up. The temperature seemed to have dropped. My fingertips were cold. I blinked a few times, my eyes dry from staring, and wiped them with the back of my hand. When I looked at the reflection again, I saw the silhouette move slightly as if shifting position. I snapped my head towards the seat. Empty. I felt a pounding in my chest. I tried leaning forward and looking at the reflection from a different angle. The shape was always there, always in that seat, always maintaining that relaxed posture. It looked as if it had one arm on the armrest. I tried to see more details, but the poor lighting and the dirt on the glass made it hard. I noticed the overhead light flickering more often now. I reached up and tapped the light fixture lightly, with my knuckles. Gave a faint rattle but didn't stabilize. My shoulder blades felt stiff. I rolled them, trying to loosen the tension. My palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants. I wished I had someone to talk to. The silence felt heavy. I listened hard, trying to catch any other sound. The whisper came again. Just a soft breath, next to my ear. I jerked away, pressing myself into the window. I could feel my heart thudding. My neck muscles were tight, and I had a slight headache forming at my temples. I took another sip of water. It tasted stale. I forced myself to drink it anyway. My stomach churned. I wondered how long this train ride would last. There had been no announcement, no timetable posted. I usually didn't mind the quiet, but now it felt wrong. I stared at the door at the far end of the car, wondering if I should try again. Maybe there was a conductor somewhere. Maybe I could find another passenger. I stood up again. My legs felt a bit shaky. I walked slowly down the aisle, and the floor creaked under my steps. Each row of seats looked the same. Faded patterns, chipped armrests. I reached the door and tried the latch once more. I pushed, pulled, wiggled it, but it didn't move. I felt a surge of frustration. I slapped the door with my palm and hissed a curse under my breath. I turned around. The car looked long and empty. I returned to my seat. When I got there, I noticed the seat next to mine looked slightly different. The cushion seemed pressed down a bit more than before. I couldn't say for sure, but I reached out and pressed on it with my hand. It bounced back normally. I shook my head and sat down again, feeling my knees ache. I looked at the window, expecting to see that silhouette again. It was still there, unmoving now, just a dark figure in the reflection. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the strands damp with sweat. I didn't know what else to do. I leaned back and stared straight ahead. The train rattled over some uneven tracks, and I felt a slight jolt. I tightened my grip on the armrest. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I reached for my water bottle and saw it was almost empty. I took a small sip and swished it around before swallowing. I felt a dull pressure in my chest, like I couldn't get a full breath. I opened my jacket a bit, trying to let some air in. The smell of old fabric filled my nose. A few minutes passed. The whisper came again, this time a bit louder. It sounded like a single word, maybe hey, right by my left ear. I whipped my head to the side, anger mixing with fear.
I saw nothing.
I spoke in a low voice. Nothing happened. I tapped my foot against the floor, trying to release some tension. My footsteps made a dull thud. The train continued moving at a steady pace. Through the window I saw faint lights passing by outside, too distant to make out any shapes. I considered changing seats. I glanced at the rows ahead. They were all identical. I wondered if the silhouette would follow me if I moved. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked 2 rows ahead. I sat down by the window again. I looked at the reflection. The silhouette was there next to me again. I felt a chill on my skin. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I pressed my lips together, feeling anger flare up. I wanted it to leave me alone, but I couldn't force it away. I couldn't even touch it. I slammed my hand on the armrest. The sound echoed in the empty car. My breathing was ragged. I tried to calm down. I wiped sweat from my forehead. The silhouette didn't react. It just sat there, as if comfortable, as if it had every right to be there. I glared at the reflection. My jaw hurt from clenching it. I whispered, "What do you want?" No answer. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and tried to think about practical things. My next stop should be coming in a couple of hours. If I could just hold out until then, I could leave this train. I wondered whether I would be able to. My stomach twisted at the thought. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. There was no physical threat so far, just this presence that I couldn't explain. It was worse than someone yelling or banging around. The quiet pressure of it made my skin crawl. I tapped my fingers on my thigh. I listened. The whisper didn't come back for a while. The silhouette just stayed there, visible only in the reflection. I tried not to look at it, but my eyes kept drifting back. I noticed my heart had slowed a bit, settling into a nervous thump. I flexed my fingers. I tried to distract myself by examining the details of the car. The overhead luggage racks were empty. The emergency exit signs were faded and dusty. The window locks looked old and stiff. The floor had stains I couldn't identify. As time dragged on, the tension didn't fade. I didn't relax. My muscles stayed tight. Every small sound made my shoulders jerk. A train rattled. The lights flickered. My ears rang from the quiet. I swallowed hard, feeling the dryness in my throat. I tried to breathe through my nose, slow and steady. The silhouette never vanished. It stayed there unmoving, but I sensed its presence growing more familiar, as if I'd known it for years. I didn't like that feeling. It made my skin prickle. It made me want to stand up and pace. But I didn't. I stayed in my seat, watching the reflection, watching that shape, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The train rolled on, cutting through the darkness, passing empty fields and silent towns. I remained stuck in that seat, with this unwanted guest. The whisper came and went, always too quiet to fully understand. My body ached from tension. My eyes were dry and itchy. My mouth tasted bitter. I felt trapped in a small space with no escape. No one to call and no explanation. I tried not to think beyond what was happening. I focused on the seat, sound, and reflection. I forced myself to sit still. The shadowy figure didn't fade, strike, or do anything but stay by my side. Hours might have passed. I couldn't tell. The train never stopped. The whisper returned in intervals. I just waited. My skin felt clammy. My fingertips were numb. My knees felt weak. I couldn't sleep or rest. When I looked out the window, I saw my own eyes staring back, tired and red. Next to me, in that same reflection, the silhouette sat quietly, as if settled in for the long ride. I didn't know when this would end. I sat there breathing carefully, trying not to lose my mind. The train kept moving through the night, and I stayed beside something I couldn't understand. It never attacked me or even touched me, but it never left. I gripped the armrest and waited for the next station, wondering if I would find a way off this train before morning. I arrived at the mansion on a warm afternoon. The sky was clear. The moving truck had left, and I stood alone in the main hall, with my bags and some scattered boxes. The place was large, old, and mostly quiet. There were high ceilings, wide corridors, wooden floors that creaked under my weight, and walls covered with old wallpaper and a few paintings. The paint on the walls was faded. The air smelled like old fabric and dust. I felt sweat on my forehead. I was tired from the drive. I decided to find my bedroom, drop my things there, and then explore the rest of the house. After carrying my suitcases upstairs, I stepped into a corridor leading to what would be my room. The corridor was long, not very bright, and had a single painting hanging on the wall to my left. I stopped in front of it. It showed a figure wearing a hooded cloak. The face was not visible. The paint looked smeared or blurred, as if the details had been rubbed away. The background looked like a hazy landscape with some kind of mist. The figure seemed to be standing in mud or damp ground, judging by the dark brown shades at the bottom of the canvas. I noticed no frame inscription, no signature. I felt a slight unease looking at it, but I shrugged it off. It was just an old painting, maybe damaged or poorly restored. I left my things in the bedroom and decided to get something to eat. I spent the rest of the day unpacking, arranging furniture, opening old cabinets, and making some phone calls. Nothing unusual happened. The house was silent most of the time. By evening, I was ready to sleep. I switched off most lights and went upstairs. As I walked down the corridor toward my bedroom, the air smelled different. It had a faint scent of damp earth. The wooden floor felt cold under my feet. I stopped at the painting and looked closely. The figure still wore the same hood. I leaned in. The paint looked dry and cracked. I backed up a step. For a moment I had the impression that the figure's head was turned slightly, as if following me. It looked like the position of the head was different from earlier in the day, but I was tired and not certain. I moved a step to the left, then to the right. I couldn't see any obvious movement now. The figure stayed still. I told myself I was tired. The house was old. Maybe there were drafts causing strange smells. I went to my room and lay in bed. I tried not to think about it. The night was quiet, but I barely slept due to some distant noises. Maybe the wind outside or some old pipes. In the morning, I checked the painting again. It looked the same as when I first saw it. The figure faced forward, hooded head slightly tilted forward. Nothing strange. During the day, I explored the mansion more thoroughly. I checked other rooms, found old furniture, dusty books, and a few other paintings. None of them showed anything unusual. I made myself a small lunch in the kitchen. Then I walked through the corridor again, looking at the painting. It was daylight and everything looked normal. I touched the frame. It felt solid, made of old wood. I tried lifting it. It was attached firmly to the wall. I peered behind it by angling it slightly. Just a normal canvas, old nails, and plaster wall behind it.
Nothing odd.
That night, while heading to my room again, I noticed the damp earth smell returning. It was subtle, like the smell you get after rain. I paused in front of the painting and felt a slight tingle in my stomach. The figure's hood looked angled differently. I was certain now. The previous night I thought the head faced forward. Tonight it looked angled a few degrees toward my position in the corridor. I moved a bit and watched carefully. I saw no movement. It was always still when I stared directly at it. My palms felt a little sweaty. My heart rate rose. I decided to test something. I walked backwards slowly and kept my eyes on the painting. It did not change. I looked away for a second, then looked back. I couldn't be sure, but I thought the head had tilted again, just a fraction of an inch. It felt insane. I reached out and touched the canvas. It felt rough. I pressed gently. No trick mechanism. I was just tired, I told myself. I went to bed and tried to sleep. Over the next few nights, the same pattern continued. Every time I passed the painting at night, it sealed like damp soil. The figure's head angle seemed to adjust when I wasn't looking. I tried moving quickly past it. I tried turning the lights on in the corridor. I tried staying there longer to catch it in the act. Nothing worked. The figure never moved while I was watching. It only appeared different after I looked away. I became nervous. My stomach tightened every time I approached that corridor. My chest felt heavy, and my mouth went dry. I was sure something was wrong. I told a local handyman who came by to fix a window about the painting, but he just shrugged and said old houses have strange art. I asked him to remove it. He tried, but the painting was firmly attached. He said he could come back another day with better tools. I agreed. That night, I set up my phone on a small table and recorded video while I pretended to sleep. I left the corridor light on. In the morning, I checked the video. The phone had stopped recording after a few minutes. Battery drained, which was odd because it was fully charged. I tried again the next night with a different device. Same result. No proof. I tried to remove the painting myself. I tugged at it until it came off the wall. The nails popped. I took it downstairs and stored it in a closet. I checked that corridor. It was empty now. I felt relief. That night, I headed to bed and looked at the corridor. The painting was back on the wall. I almost dropped my flashlight. My heart hammered. I knew I had moved it, yet there it was. I touched my face. My skin was cold. The frame looked perfect. No sign of removal. I tried covering it with a sheet. The next night, the sheet was gone. I tried removing the painting again and placing it in the garage. It returned to the wall. I tried pushing a heavy cabinet in front of it. The cabinet was moved aside overnight. I found it a few feet away. My breathing became shallow. I felt a dull ache in my shoulders. I gripped my flashlight and whispered curses at the painting. It made no difference. I tried damaging it, taking a small screwdriver and chipping at the corner. The paint flaked a bit. I went to bed. The next day, it was restored, perfect as before, with no damage. The figure watched me. Its head seemed more clearly angled toward me now. I felt a constant tension in my chest. I rubbed my eyes, tried to calm down, and tried to think logically. But logic didn't help. The painting acted against all reason. I tried ignoring it for days, just hurrying to my room without stopping. But at night, I always sensed that smell of damp earth. Every time I looked at the painting, the figure seemed closer to the foreground. I noticed slight differences in the posture of its shoulders and the curve of the hood. The feeling of being watched never stopped. I called another contractor and told him to take the painting away in his truck. I paid him on the spot. He left with the painting. That night it was back. I considered leaving the mansion. I actually did leave for a few days, staying at a cheap hotel. When I came back, the painting was waiting. I tried setting it on fire. I poured lighter fluid and burned it right there in the corridor. The flames caught quickly, and the smoke rose. I coughed, my eyes watering. When it was done, I saw ashes on the floor. I felt lightheaded but relieved. I cleaned the mess and checked again. No painting. I slept well that night. In the morning, the painting was back. Perfect. No burns. I sat down on the floor and stared at it. My hands were shaking, and I wiped sweat from my neck. I realized I could not get rid of it. It was always here, always watching. I stopped trying to remove it. I tried barricading the corridor. I stacked chairs and boxes. Each morning they were pushed aside. I tried nailing a board over it. The board vanished by the next day. I tried asking local experts about the mansion's art. They had no records of anything strange. When I showed them the painting, they noticed nothing odd. I started sleeping in a different part of the mansion. I avoided the corridor as much as possible, but needed to pass by occasionally. Every time I did, I saw small changes. The figure's hood angle shifted. Its posture changed. Sometimes the smell was stronger, sometimes weaker. I noticed that when I moved side to side, the figure seemed to track me, only by fractions of an inch, but enough for me to know. I felt my heart rate increase whenever I approached that corridor. I felt pressure behind my eyes as if I were holding my breath all the time. My mouth went dry and my arms felt heavy. I never heard any voice from the painting, nor did I hear footsteps, only silence. But the painting always responded to my presence with those subtle shifts. I tried covering my eyes and walking past. I still smelled the damp earth and I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I tried talking to the figure, saying that I would leave it alone if it left me alone. There was no response. I tried sleeping right there in the corridor one night, watching it and staying awake. I ended up dozing off. When I woke up, the figure's head angle had changed again. I considered selling the mansion. Some potential buyers came. They looked at everything. None of them mentioned anything odd. They simply said that the painting was interesting or old-fashioned. I tried pointing out changes to them, but they saw nothing. They lost interest in buying for other reasons. I remained stuck here. I tried to accept it. Fighting it made no difference. Destroying it didn't work. Removing it didn't work. Covering it or blocking it didn't work. The painting always returned, always intact, and always shifting when I was not looking. I was trapped with it. I changed my daily routine to avoid passing that corridor at night. If I had to pass it, I did so quickly. I kept the lights on and focused on what I could control. My breathing, my steps. I learned to live with the fear. The fear never left, but it became a part of my life here. Sometimes I paused and glanced at the painting, trying to see if it would do something more. It never did. It never escalated beyond these subtle movements and the smell of damp earth. It never produced a sound. It never touched me. It only watched. Over time, my reactions became less extreme. I still felt nervous, but I stopped yelling at it or trying to break it. I just walked past, head down, trying not to think too much. It followed me silently with its unseen eyes under that hood. I kept living here because I had no other place to go and no solution to remove it. There were no sudden endings, no miraculous solutions. The painting remained. The figure remained hooded, blurred, and quiet. It watched me when I passed by. It always turned its head slightly when I looked away. It always smelled like damp earth at night. It always returned, no matter what I did. In the end, I just stayed. I slept in a different room, far from that corridor, only crossing it when necessary. I ate in the kitchen, read in the study, and spent most of my time in other parts of the mansion. But whenever I needed to go upstairs at night, I felt that familiar tension in my chest. I walked quietly, my heart beating fast, my palms sweaty. I never looked at the painting for long. I never tried to speak to it again. I never tried to destroy it again. I learned to live with it. It watched me, and I tried to ignore it, stepping through that corridor as quickly as possible, always aware that it was there, always aware that it would follow me with its silent and unsettling interest.